Welcome back, fellow football fanatics, to another live show of college football with Sam. Before we begin, can everyone hear me? Just want to make sure everyone can hear me so we avoid the mistake that transpired the last time we went live. And my apologies for the long delay and break from live shows. I was sick last week. I still am. You'll probably, as I talk throughout this segment, begin to hear it in my voice. The longer I talk, the more plugged up I'll get, the more hoarse my voice gets. Mentally, I would say I'm like 95% of the way there, maybe 100% of the way there. Physically, probably in between 80 to 90%. Okay, good. Someone can hear me. Perfect. So that's why we didn't go live last week. On top of, well, the fact that, yeah, when I'm sick, I'm going to try and do as much as possible, and I did releasing some videos, but was sick. So thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you for your understanding. We plan to be live Sunday, Monday, Wednesday at 6 p.m. with an additional show tomorrow, mid-morning afternoon. I think I said 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. We'll see if it stays there, but it will be no later than noon due to the fact that I don't want to do 2 live shows within 6 hours of each other. Have a fascinating question to begin the show from Max Ellis, the first to pop in the chat. Do you think the Big Ten gets a 4th playoff spot? Do you think the ACC and Big 12 are looking like one-spot conferences right now? So I think the Big Ten gets a 4th playoff spot. And I think the reason they do is that between Washington hosting Oregon and between Michigan hosting Ohio State, on top of the idea that I believe Indiana and Ohio State are basically locks right now, and Oregon is performing well enough analytically, and the Indiana loss is aging well enough to where they could get in at 10-2. I think they likely would, but I don't know. I think there's a good chance the Big Ten gets a 4th playoff spot, because I think that Washington and Michigan combined have enough of a chance to upset one of Ohio State or Oregon in that final week. And if Washington is capable of upsetting Oregon, then I think USC is capable of beating Oregon on the road. Ergo, USC is capable of winning out. Right now, I do think the Big Ten gets 4 teams in. I think at the beginning of the year, I projected them to get 5 in. I went on kind of a bold limit, said the Big Ten would get 5 or more spots. That's not happening. USC needed to beat Notre Dame for that to happen, and they did not. That's what we're going to talk about today in part, is how Notre Dame was able to, I think, secure their playoff spot and kind of push USC on the outside looking in. USC needs to win out if they want to get in the college football playoff. They have to. Maybe I'm wrong there. If Michigan wins out, Illinois wins out, and Notre Dame wins out, and you take a loss to an Oregon team who, goes 11-1, and either finishes 11-1 or somehow reaches Indy and wins, then maybe you get in because you have really good losses and an amazing quality win over Michigan. But that's looking really far into the future. I think most importantly, Notre Dame has their spot locked up. I want to get to some housekeeping things before we begin, and I think the best thing to touch on is the firing of Billy Napier, or as Josh Pate has affectionately called him, William Napier. I affectionately call him one of the worst head coaches in all of America. I have a confession to make in regards to myself and how I viewed Florida football this year. I hate watched them. I hate watched Florida football from the minute they kicked off. Technically in week 2, because playing the Long Island Sharks isn't exactly a game when you have that type of roster and size disparity. But when they played USF, and it was a close game, I tuned in. I was rooting hard for USF because I don't like bad coaching. And Florida was the epitome, and is the epitome right now, of bad coaching. That's why Billy Napier's been fired. Napier was 22-23 through 4 years, 12-16 in SEC play as the head coach of the Florida Gators. And I just want to say to Florida fans, you deserve better than that. You hired coaches from the G5 that panned out to be Urban Meyer, and I know Steve Spurrier came from Duke, but Duke football back then was worse than Duke football in recent memory under Elko or now under Manny Diaz. You hired 2 elite coaches from the bottom rungs of college football, and they panned out, and were elite. They were Hall of Fame coaches. It just didn't work this time, and you deserve something better. I don't know if you want Scott Strickland making the new hire. I think that Lane Kiffin is the obvious choice. I'm not even going to say I think. I know Lane Kiffin is the obvious choice. Lane Kiffin is a coach that I had questions about entering this year because last year's coaching job was pretty bad. Last year, Ole Miss had a worse coaching job by a mile than Penn State did, and Penn State lost all the games that mattered. Ole Miss won their biggest game of the year against Georgia, but lost to, as the saying goes and the meme goes, Kentucky, Florida, and an LSU team that, much like this year, didn't have a rushing attack, and last year didn't have a defense. So they missed out on the playoffs. It was I would argue, sort of a coaching disaster outside of that Georgia game. Well, Kiffin this year, and this is, of course, depending on how Ole Miss finishes out, but I think they are more disciplined. I think that they are more balanced. I think they take every game more seriously. This is a better coached Ole Miss team than the team last year, and I would argue even the year before that, when they played a rough Alabama team on the road, never had any consistency, and Georgia was able to de-pants them in Sanford Stadium in early November that year. This is Kiffin's best, or certainly one of his best coaching jobs thus far. So the fact that you are seeing him mature as a head coach, and Ole Miss has done enough in the recruiting world, getting top 25, getting top 20 classes, their portal evaluations this year panned out just as they did last year. I think that pairing him with a great portal class and Florida's resources and naturally superior recruiting pipelines and keeping DJ Lagway to be developed by him would be an ace move. And I think that Lane Kiffin would love to be there. I know that Florida hiring him is the perfect fit. I don't exactly know if Kiffin is going to leave Ole Miss, but I'd be inclined to believe that he will, because Florida is a better job than the Ole Miss job. I don't know if he can win a title, and I would probably say, barring another miraculous portal cycle or them miraculously hitting on a underrated recruiting class or having one of the best developmental programs, or the best, probably, yeah, the best developmental program in football, he can't win a title, or let alone probably play for one at Ole Miss, barring a ridiculously almost coincidental amount of boxes being checked. At Florida, we've seen Spurrier do it. We've seen Meyer do it. I'm not saying Kiffin is either of those, but maybe he can become one with a better program and better resources. Those are my thoughts with Napier and with Kiffin. I didn't spend too much time on Napier because I think everyone can acknowledge how much of a disaster it was. He never got his ground. He never got his feet in the ground. The foundation was never set. There are some things they did well. I think that the change at defensive coordinator panned out, but the offense regressed because he doubled down, and he was ego-driven. He was arrogant, and it ultimately cost him in Florida a season that could have been wonderful if properly managed. I mean, make no mistake about it. There are plenty of teams very similar to Penn State in this regard. There are many teams that if you swapped their coaching staff with Penn State or Florida's, they have the exact same seasons that Penn State or Florida are having, but those successful coaching staffs, instead of just having good or great teams, are competing for titles with either Penn State or Florida's roster. Penn State fired Franklin, made the right move. Gets the stamp of approval from anyone with a brain, myself included. Florida, it's the same thing. In fact, the stamp of approval should be even larger, and Florida probably should have made the move before Penn State did with Franklin. Why? Because Franklin actually put together some good seasons and at times looked like it could have been a winning culture. Napier never had that at Florida, ever. Outside of Lane Kiffin, I would say that you can probably nab maybe Eli Drinkwitz. Maybe you could nab, I don't know, Alex Golish. Go back to looking at a G5 coach, except I think Golish would do pretty well. Maybe you tab Sumrall. Or maybe you go after Glenn Schumann at Georgia. Or you go after, Ohio State's Brian Hartline. Or you hire, like, D'Anton Lynn. Or, I know I'm just throwing coordinator names out there, but Florida is a good enough job where if they find the right candidate, whether he is a great coordinator, as some of those names I've mentioned, even if they're not like eye-popping fits, or they're a head coach that fits, or they're a head coach that you may not know if they fit. Florida's a good enough job that if they work hard and they're not ego-driven and they're calculated and they're not in over their head, and the administration does its job, and I think at this point, that's a big question mark, is the administration. You probably, again, do not want Strickland making that next hire. Hiring Napier, hiring Mullen, and then canning him, and he wanted Napier to stay last year when the boosters wanted him to be fired and make a move at Kiffin. The boosters were proven right. As of what I know, they're 1-0 against the AD. It's typically not a good sign because boosters are not patient people. So I believe that this can be a massive opportunity for the University of Florida. Now, will they take it? We'll have to see. But Billy Napier has been fired, and Florida's been liberated from his oppression. And that's exactly what Florida fans went through, was harsh, insufferable oppression. That was his game management. It was that bad. And the mismanagement of Lagway, of the lines of scrimmage that were so elite and at times flashed that this year, but ultimately fell through, and a defense that, look, through 4 or 5 games was playing like a top 5 defense, but eventually at the end of the day, they just couldn't do it anymore. And you could see some of the cracks in the depth, the cracks in the development were very apparent, cracks in coaching are apparent. Ron Roberts is going to be an awesome defensive coordinator for someone next year. I mean, heck, maybe Lane Kiffin comes or another coach comes and they keep him there because he was certainly doing his job as the defensive coordinator and linebackers coach for the Gators. I think it's Lane Kiffin or bust, but if that somehow doesn't work out, there are plenty of other good candidates for Florida to look into and make a run at. It's the same thing with Penn State. The only thing and last thing I'll mention here that I think you do not want if you're Florida, you do not want that LSU job to come open because LSU will be the number 1 job on the market, barring maybe Penn State's billionaires getting involved and deciding they want to pay a head coach NFL level salary. And that's very unlikely. And even then, LSU probably has... They have more money somewhere. That is a top 5, certainly top 10 job in America. It would be the best job that comes open out of all the jobs that are on my radar and anyone else's radar as of right now, barring maybe like Dan Lanning or Ryan Day leaving for the NFL, or Kirby Smart decides, you know what, I'm done with this, and I don't think any of those are happening. All right, we can move on and discuss some of the games from Saturday, or from Friday, perhaps. So I already made instant reactions for plenty of these, but I want to go through and give some quick recaps on them. I want to do that because I think that with a day to process some of these games that I did instant reactions for in particular, I can give some new takeaways. So we're going to do that. And the Friday games, I have some interesting thoughts on in particular. And I would say this is especially the case with Miami and Louisville. So Louisville beat Miami and kind of dominated them in a sense. If not for that fumble recovery, if not for that great defensive play towards the end of the game that set up Malachi Toney for a touchdown run, beautifully designed play. If not for that, this game would have been over well before Carson Beck's fourth interception. And speaking of the 4 interceptions, my biggest takeaway from this game, or biggest takeaways, plural, are that Jeff Brom is an elite coach and that Miami can win it all. I don't think any of you would have expected that second takeaway, but I want to explain why. The reason why is that Miami turned it over 4 times. Beck got caught off guard. I think Cristobal was caught off guard. I think Corey Heatherman for the first 2 drives, the scripted drives, was caught off guard. I don't think Miami, for the good, for the bad, for the ugly, expected Louisville to bring what they brought. Now, that's a coaching thing, for sure. However, I can excuse the fact that it's off a bye for Miami. It's a Friday night game, and Louisville isn't exactly ranked. So there's not a ton to look forward to with the home environment. And you're coming off a bye, and it's a rare team that comes off the bye that isn't clunky. I mean, even think of, I can think of Ryan Day at Ohio State. You know, they've come off the bye several times. They're the best program in America right now, and they'll look sleepy off a bye. I watched Georgia play Florida last year, and they came off a bye and didn't know what the heck they were doing for a few quarters there, for a few series. And Beck had the same type of game in that game against Florida that he did here, where he made some errant throws. Other throws were just risks. You know, you shoot the 50-50 balls, you try to hit an explosive play deep, and Louisville was just always able to high point him and bring him in. You win some, you lose some. It's the reality of college football. But Louisville really won all of those plays. And look, they controlled the lines of scrimmage. They were able to limit the ground game. And early on, they were able to move the football. But after that early series, their defense clamped down outside of one play, big play to Chris Bell in between the zone on a crossing route or a slant route. He was able to take it, and with his speed and acceleration, was able to get into the end zone. Outside of that one play, Miami was able to lock up Louisville. They held them to negative 0.11 EPA per play, 5.43 yards per play. Louisville had a 43% success rate, but they rarely hit explosives, and they were held to, 24 points. I think if you showed people those first few series by Louisville and then said Miami will hold them to 10 more points the rest of the way, I think people would have said, oh yeah, Miami's going to win. And they would have been impressed by that. The problem is Beck, he went 25 of 35, decent completion percentage. His QBR is still top 15, and he's overall had a good year. But he's had games whether against USF or Florida or Louisville, he's made some errant throws. And despite completing over 70% of his passes and still holding a 73% completion percentage, he threw 4 interceptions. And that last one, when they were in field goal range, was bad. That pass would have been a skipped pass, if not for the Louisville defenders' ability to see the ball, to recognize the play, to read the play, and quickly make the diving interception. Louisville upset Miami, and in truth, it was an upset. After those first scripted drives, Miami was the better team for the rest of the game. Not by enough to win, but Miami did not play anything close to its A game. Louisville played to its A game, and Miami still had a chance to win late in the fourth quarter. Again, maybe you disagree with me, and if you do, you should comment your thoughts down below as to why you disagree with me. But I believe that this game shows Miami has what it takes to win it all. The biggest prerequisite, I think, to win it all, there are a few of them, but I think the biggest one, outside of having a future quarterback who is going to get his shot in the NFL, just shot, not saying He will play or start on Sundays, but at least he will be looked at. He will be drafted or he will be invited to fall camp. He's viewed as something by the NFL, potentially something, and there are rare exceptions to that, is elite defense. You have to have near elite to elite defense, and everything flows downward from that. That is what Ohio State taught me last year, Michigan, the two Georgia teams, even 2020 Alabama. They were led by their offense, but that defense was ridiculously good and talented. LSU the year prior, one of the worst defenses to win it all in recent memory. They had a top 10, top 5 NFL QB and the two best wide receivers in the NFL. And they didn't finish number 1 in power ratings. That was Ohio State, who had a top 5 defense. The Clemson teams won it all. Brent Venables' defense. Nick Saban, Alabama. Outside of the 2020 season, which defenses were down across the board, they won it all mainly leading with defense. Miami has the defense necessary, I think, to win it all. And they have a quarterback who's viewed as something by the NFL. And downstream from that, too, they have an offensive line that, yes, they struggled to run the ball at times, but they got push when needed in certain moments, and Beck didn't take a sack all game. So I believe that Miami has what it takes to win it all. Now, would I favor them to? Absolutely not. But I didn't know if they were really even in that conversation. After this game, I think there's a chance they're in that conversation. They played one of their worst games, maybe their worst game all season long, and they nearly beat Jeff Brom when Jeff Brom was at his best, was coaching at his best. That's an impressive feat. A very impressive feat. Louisville was getting the ball out quickly. Louisville was using misdirection. They were bringing multiple quarterbacks in the game. At times, they were going short and across the field to move Miami around laterally. And defensively, they told Miami, we're going to go one-on-one, and they have some really good corners, and they have a great defensive line in front, and Ron English is a good defensive mind, and they were able to win. They were. And yet, despite all those things going their way and all the ways they outcoached Miami, they only won by 3. And Miami had a chance to win and tie it up. And if they did tie it up and it went to overtime, they probably would have won. So not looking for any moral victories. It's a loss Miami can't afford because now you can't afford another regular season loss. Otherwise, Georgia Tech and maybe even Louisville will get in the ACC title over you, and that will not be fun. But I think there were some positive takeaways for Miami. As for Louisville, they have a realistic shot to the playoff now. They got the required win. Virginia's going to eat up some wins with that easy schedule, so the loss won't look so bad. If they reach Charlottesville with how the rest of the field looks, they might be a lock to get in regardless. We'll see about that, though. As for the other Friday night game, Minnesota beating Nebraska. How do I put this? Whenever someone sets a program record for sacks in a game against you, you have to crawl up a wall and go into the attic and just start poring over what you did wrong. Especially when it's to Minnesota or it's to any team that is not an elite team. Oregon getting destroyed by Ohio State in the Rose Bowl and giving up 1 billion coverage sacks and not being able to do anything downfield. Lanning and his staff, you best believe, crawled up the wall, went into the attic, maybe cried for 5 minutes, and then said, we are going to do everything we can to ensure that never happens again, and we will do our best to kick these guys you-know-what whenever we play them next. That's what Nebraska needs to do here. For Minnesota to get 9 sacks when Nebraska brought in Rocco Spindler, they brought in Elijah Pritchett, they returned Henry Lutovsky, they returned Gunnar Gatula, they returned Sam Sledge, they returned Henry Lutovsky. When they brought all those pieces in and brought what they did back, and you see how Coogan is doing at Indiana, how Notre Dame's O-line is doing. And Spindler comes to Nebraska, and I think he's been good, but the line still hasn't, it hasn't moved me. It hasn't changed. If anything, it's gotten worse. That's on the coaching staff. That's my biggest takeaway, especially after sitting on it for 24, 48 hours. That's my biggest takeaway from Nebraska, Minnesota. Minnesota maximizes the talent they have to the best of their ability. Doesn't mean they get the most out of it, because I don't think Minnesota has one of the best staffs in America. But they do a better job than Nebraska and than a lot of other teams in the power leagues. It's squeezing, like taking a rag filled with water or a cloth to make the image prettier, and with water, and they rind it out. They just squeeze it out, get as much as their strength allows them to get out. That's what Minnesota does. Nebraska, it has felt like at times this year, particularly on the offensive and defensive lines, tried to get in as many good players from the portal as possible, and they just threw all the ingredients in a dish, put it in the oven, and expected it to taste good, without really strategically sifting through the nuances and the intricacies of these players and how they might fit in the scheme. Now, some of that may be coaching malpractice. I think another part of that is Dana Holgorsen and John Butler are coordinators in year one. And unlike Ohio State, where Brian Hartline's job is probably one of the easiest in America, with day at his beck and call, help from Tyler Bowen, with wide receivers that are going to be playing on Sundays, a quarterback who will play on Sunday, and Patricia, he's done a phenomenal job, but also he has a ton of talent on defense too. Nebraska does not have that type of talent to immediately reload. They just do not, and you're seeing it here. The losses that they sustained, especially on the defensive front, I would argue in part at running back, in part in some positions on the offensive line, are really affecting them. They are. Maybe even losses at tight end too. It's a little bit of speculation there, but if Fedoni comes back and you have him and Lindenmeyer, maybe the offense has another good receiver, another good blocker. Kind of a question for you all, almost. I don't know the answer to that. What I do know is that this isn't sustainable for Big Ten play. So Northwestern, for example, they have Aiden Hubbard. They have defensive ends that can get to the... Oh, shoot. Dude, why did that happen? Why did that happen? Oh, I switched, gosh. I overthought it. I switched too early. Anyway. This is not sustainable. Well, hold on. Sorry about that, guys. This is not sustainable for Big Ten play. Northwestern, they have Aiden Hubbard. They have quality defensive ends, linebackers, a good, stingy, sticky defense. And Northwestern isn't even the toughest opponent remaining on your schedule. You have USC. You have to travel to a hot UCLA team. Travel to them, not host them. You have to travel to Penn State. And you have to host an Iowa team that I love. They have some of the best trench play in America right now, and they're probably a better team than they were last year. And they're healthier than they were last year when you played them. This is not good if you're Nebraska. If you're Minnesota, you have the world in front of you. You're not reaching the playoffs because you have Oregon remaining on your schedule. But you have a realistic shot, I would argue, to go 8-4, 9-3. You're in all likelihood a lock to go 7-5, if not 6-6. The season is going to be similar to last year, and given all that you lost, I think that's impressive. I think you reloaded. Drake Lindsay also said this in my instant reaction, but I'll say it here again. Lindsay outplayed Dylan Raiola. He got the ball out quickly. He threw with more anticipation. He led his receivers. He did well. Dylan Raiola didn't. Dylan Raiola took sack after sack after sack. And yes, he didn't have as good of protection. But regardless of that, he didn't play all that well. Nebraska's defense missed some tackles, had some blown coverage assignments, had some bad angles. They have not reloaded as well as they would have liked. They would have liked to not just reload from last year, but progress and take the next step. And I think, to a certain degree, they have. They've made dramatic progress at certain positions. I think that quarterback, defensive back, and receiver are noticeably better than they were last year. Special teams is obviously better than it was last year. But at other parts, they have simply reloaded, and at some, defensive line and offensive line, they have regressed. It's as simple as that. If you're in Nebraska, you have to go back to the drawing board. This is a game that forces change, that forces going back to the drawing board, and I will dive deeper into some of my other takeaways, expand upon them more in a video, a future video that will be released tomorrow. But just kind of basic takeaways, instinct reaction is this is a drawing board game. You lost. I don't know if you're the inferior team here. Power ratings would say you're still better by 7 points on a neutral field, and I do agree with that, but your coaching staff got humiliated by Minnesota's coaching staff. And if you're Nebraska, that should never happen. It shouldn't. That's why Minnesota stormed the field here. That's why Fleck was ecstatic about the win, because they don't have the same expectations you do. And maybe I'm incorrect for saying this, but at this point, nor should they. They shouldn't. They don't have the same resources that you do. They don't have the same history, the same even recruiting blueprint that you do. And yet they coached circles around you and have done a better job, I think, of developing what they have than you have if you're Nebraska and Matt Rule. So this is a game where you got to go back to the drawing board and you got to figure some stuff out. You got to figure it out now, because no one left on the schedule after this game is an automatic win. And I'm not saying not winning 10 games is a failure. That's crap. But if you don't reach 9 or 8 wins, that's a failure. And after how the season started and how Rule himself said this is a playoffs or bust year, there's going to be an ugly taste in some people's mouths if there aren't at least major changes made after this year if they continue to play like this at certain positions. I think Donovan Raiola's gone after the year. I really believe that. And I wouldn't be shocked if they tried to make a big hire on the offensive line, or if they also shook up the staff at other parts defensively or offensively. Still think they'll reach 8 or 9 wins, but the fact that they and Minnesota might be staring down similar win totals at the end of the year, and you have that head-to-head loss, and it was a blowout loss at the end. It was close on paper, but final scoreboard, they dominated you. They owned the second half adjustments. And that's that right there. Shouldn't happen again if you're Nebraska, but given Rule's track record, we'll have to see if it does happen again. The USC game, the Iowa game, the Penn State game will be a great test if any adjustments were made, and more importantly, if they worked. Man, that was such a bad loss. Such a bad loss. I mean, that for Nebraska was worse than what happened between Michigan and Washington for the Washington side. I do need to blow my nose. So, my apologies about that. While I'm away blowing my nose, if any of you have something you want to ask me, any of you, send in a super chat. And outside of the first reply that I get, I'm going to highlight a chat right here. Just like location. Whatever chat. I'm going to pin this chat. I'm going to pin this chat here, and anything after this chat, the first thing that comes in, I'll respond to. Maybe first 2. Let's do first 3 things. 3 comments after this one, I'll reply to. Anything after that, if you want me to reply to it, it'll be a super chat. And I'll do that when I come back. So, see you guys soon. Next up will be Michigan versus Washington. Another quick recap there. And then we'll get on to non-instant reactions, and those segments will be released as their own videos. So, see you guys soon. All right, I had to bring some tissue paper with me because it's bad and it will get probably worse the longer I talk here. But okay, so I pinned that comment. Okay, Michigan dominates second half. Now, where was this energy when y'all were in Cali facing USC? I think travel had something to do with it in both games. Against Washington this past Saturday and 2 Saturdays ago against Michigan. Matchups, USC is way better on the lines of scrimmage than Washington on both sides. USC also has better receivers. I mean, USC is a better version of Washington. I would argue they're actually better at quarterback in the throwing game. Williams is somewhat of a one-trick pony. Somewhat. He does not have the same supporting cast as Maava, and I think Maava actually throws the football better. Like, in every way, minus quarterback run, I think USC is better than Washington, and they're dramatically better on the lines of scrimmage. So, totally different matchup there. How are you feeling about the Ohio State game at this point in the season? I'm pretty 50-50 about it. Last week, I was leaning towards Ohio State. I think same with the prior. So after the Oklahoma game, and then after the Wisconsin game and USC game, I leaned Ohio State. After the Nebraska game, I leaned Michigan. After this game, it's probably as close as it's ever been. I'd go probably now again with Michigan because Michigan's showing progress at wide receiver, and they won on the lines. They truly won on the lines of scrimmage. It wasn't like some other games where the lines of scrimmage was a push, but Justice Haynes was able to make something out of nothing. They just straight up won man-to-man. So I think I'm pretty 50-50 right now on that game. And then last but not least, will Indiana win multiple playoff games? I'm going to say yes, if you count getting a first-round bye as essentially winning the first round. I don't know if Indiana is going to win in the quarterfinals. I don't even know if they'll make the title game. If they reach there, it'll be hard to win it. But will they win a playoff game? I'm confident they'll at least win one, and I think they have enough in them to win two. Like, without even looking at a bracket. So, thank you for those 3 questions. We'll get back to doing what we're doing here. If any of you have something else that you want to... Oh, I didn't mean to delete that message. I did not mean to delete that. Mr. GUI. Meant to unpin it. Didn't mean to delete it. My apologies. Yeah, whatever. We can move on and talk about Michigan beating Washington. Michigan had a very dominant fourth quarter performance that I have not seen from them in a long time. So, the last time that Michigan was truly a fourth quarter team, besides 2023, but 2023 was more of an all-quarter team. They did well usually for 60 minutes in most of their games. The last time Michigan was truly a team that stumbled in the first half and dominated in the second was 2022. This team in this game reminded me a lot of 2022 Michigan, where they, after stumbling for a bit, they came out of halftime, different game plan, and they kind of just started really looking like the better team. I know they failed inside the 10. It's something Michigan and Ohio State apparently have had in common against Washington, is they won by 3 scores, but they could have won by 4 if they could just power run for Michigan 2 yards and for Ohio State an inch. If they could just do that, the wins would have looked more impressive, but it didn't happen. Didn't really matter either. The offensive game plan was brilliant. The defensive game plan, Michigan still sent pressure, but they operated more out of a normal 4-2-5 formation. They didn't try any of the cute 5-2 stuff. They didn't really put 7 people up in front of the lines of scrimmage as they've done in the past. They didn't zero blitz all that much. There were definitely some defensive adjustments, and Lamar Morgan had a play sheet, and a headset. So I think they've made some changes defensively, like not just in terms of game to game, but I think they're getting more people involved, and there's going to be different philosophies defensively. It was a good coaching move, is what I'm saying, and a good coaching job by Moore. I think that pending on how real this Washington game is, and same with the defensive adjustments, we have just witnessed more mature as a coach. Where Chip Lindsey, I think that he's a good hire. Elite hire, no. But then again, I don't even know if an elite hire could do a ton with these receivers. I think he's a good hire. Wink Martindale, not a good hire initially, but if Michigan's forcing him to make changes and maybe they'll move on from him at the end of the year, that's a good move. Michigan, I think, really playing even-keeled and not getting too emotional, and also getting better in their execution as the game goes on, that's a coaching plus. Moore actually outcoached Jed Fish. Not by a ton. I think Washington was coaching circles around Michigan in the first half, but in the second half, Michigan won the coaching battle. And that combined with their talent advantage allowed them to kind of run away with it in the fourth quarter. I am curious to see what this Michigan team, if they play like this, could look like with a healthy Justice Haynes. They were able to run for 4.5 yards per carry without him. And with Washington liking to stack the box, especially against Michigan, and doing a good job this year with their good linebackers and defensive ends, they were healthier in this game than they were in really any game for the whole year. This was the healthiest the Washington defense has been all season long. Michigan was able to run for 4.3 yards per carry. Bryce Underwood had his best day of his career, statistically speaking, in terms of passer rating, I believe. He had 2 passing touchdowns. He threw plenty of lasers. He never really put the ball into harm's way. I think that Michigan's getting better. This is the best game I saw from Michigan the entire season. And if they continue to make progress in all of these different areas, this team at the end of November can be night and day different from when they take the field against Ohio State. They can be a night and day different team in a much better way than where they were when they played Oklahoma on the road. There's a good chance at that. Plenty of people I trust had Michigan as an 8-4, 9-3 team, some even 9-3 at best, and they had 7-5 in the equation. These people are now opening up to the idea of Michigan going 10-2 and going to the playoffs. Like people who've paid attention were understandably very skeptical of Michigan to begin the year, and now with this game and some of the improvements they've made, if they are maintained past this game, Michigan's growing on these people just a little bit. What they did against Washington was impressive. I said about middle of the game, if Michigan wins by 10 points, I'll be happy. If they just win, and this is from my personal standpoint, even as a Michigan fan, but even in an objective sense, if Michigan just won, given all the travel and given everything that was going against Washington, if they simply won by a score, that wouldn't have been a good sign. Exactly. A win's a win, but if you want to reach the playoffs, if you want to beat Ohio State and avoid upsets to Maryland, for example, and even Northwestern, crazy things have happened, crazier things have happened. You want to show that you are better than this team neutral field. And you don't do that by winning by 1 score when they have to travel thousands of miles to your place. And they have a talent disadvantage. They didn't just win by 10 points. They won by 17. They won by 3 scores. And they, I would argue, left anywhere from 13 to 17 points off the board. Washington left a field goal off the board. If this game's replayed, Michigan probably wins by more than 17 points on the average day. On the average day, Michigan did a lot more that was sustainable than what Washington did. They really put them in a blender on the lines of scrimmage, and they put Damon Williams in a blender. He had his worst game, and that is a credit to it's a big credit to the Michigan defense. Big credit to them. All right. Moving on to BYU beating Utah winning its third straight Holy War. What a thing that was. What a thing that was. That was pretty impressive. Okay, let me heart some of these super chats and let's discuss them for a bit. Okay, so going for gold _85. Hey, let me do everyone a favor and actually pull up the super chats on my screen. Let me do everyone a solid there. Do that. Okay. All right. So, going for gold _85. Unfortunately for Nebraska, Rocco Spindler out for multiple weeks, possible season. Was that after the Minnesota game? Going for gold 85? Or was that beforehand? Because if he was playing during the Minnesota game and is now out, the offensive line is going to get worse, more likely than not. I mean, maybe sometimes you shift things around, and even though you put the best player outside of his natural position, you end up getting better. So Donovan Jackson, for example, going at left tackle from guard was actually more beneficial to Ohio State than not. But I don't think Ohio State has the depth to do. I mean, Donovan Jackson was a 5-star for projected first rounder even before they made that move. That move just kind of solidified that he would be a first rounder. I don't think Nebraska has that. If that is so rough. Be praying for Rocco Spindler, everyone. And thank you for the super chat. Going for gold 85. Really appreciate that. Just moving this around here so it's not in the way of the title and everything. Okay, next super chat from Dave Valensky. What unranked 5-2 team is underlooked? Give me your reason and opinion. I'm going to go with Iowa. I think Gronowski's a better QB than a lot of people give him credit for. I think that they have a top 10 defense, and it could possibly be top 5 at season's end. I also believe that Iowa is one of those teams, along with Oregon and Miami, that is contending for the best line of scrimmage play in the country. Notre Dame too. Notre Dame more so for offensive line. I mean, I like their defensive line, but maybe not as much as those others. Iowa's up there. Iowa's lines of scrimmage are among the best in America, and their defense is better than it was last year, which is pretty phenomenal given all that they lost. So I would go with Iowa as the unranked 5-2 team that is underlooked. And my reasoning is their trench play, their special teams, and the fact that they have their best quarterback since Nate Stanley. Thank you for the super chats, guys. Let's move on. Talk about BYU beating Utah. This is what Kalani Sitake and the BYU Cougars do. They win the Holy War. They take it seriously, whether it's away or whether it's at home. They show out, they sell out, and they do what they have to do to win. BYU was a 5.5 point underdog, I guess. Anywhere, I think, from 3.5, 4.5, 5.5 points. They were ranked. They were at home, and they were ranked ahead of Utah, and they were still underdogs to Utah. And Utah's a really good team, so I understand why with, Devin Dampier, Caleb Lomu, Spencer Fano, and yet BYU, they do what they do. They do what good coaching staffs do. They find ways to win. Utah, their quarterback had tons of success. Utah actually outgained BYU. They had 2 more first downs. They had 102 more total yards. They converted more third downs. You know what the problem was? They went 1 of 5 on fourth. BYU went 1 of 3. And at one point, Utah was ahead and leading, 14-10 early fourth quarter. And BYU decides to put on the vice grips, and they go on a 14-0 run. And Utah has to get a touchdown after they've exhausted their timeouts. They go for the onside kick, don't make it, and BYU pulls away. And they're now 7-0, 4-0 in Big 12 play. Utah's 5-2 with 2 losses in conference play, so maybe they can somehow backdoor their way if they win out and others lose into the Big 12 title game. But BYU is, through all the chaos, them and Cincinnati control their own destiny. They are first. Both of those two teams are first in the Big 12 standings. It's pretty crazy. And what a story for college football this year. BYU last year at some point was 7-0, 8-0. They finished 10-2. They won the Alamo Bowl to go 11-2. They're starting off hot again. And that was with a mid-fall camp, I believe, quarterback change, or at least post-spring camp quarterback change. What a job by Satake and Jay Hill and that entire staff. That is one of the more impressive stories of the 2025 college football season, is what BYU is doing. Also, I would say what Kyle Whittingham and Morgan Scalley and Jason Beck are doing as a staff is incredibly impressive. I mean, Utah analytically won this game. They had the higher success rate, more yards per play, more expected points added per play in both pass attempts and rushing attempts. They did a better job succeeding on third down, had more explosive plays. They had more success in the red zone. And they, I would argue, did about a similar job on defense. And power ratings came away from this game saying, yeah, Utah's still the better team. BYU was just able to, force 2 more fourth down stops. And they made their field goal with Will Farron, who's a great kicker. 3 sacks, 8 TFLs for BYU, 2 sacks, 6 for Utah. It was a game of defense where if one offense was going to come through, it was probably going to be Utah's, but they didn't, because Jay Hill is one of the better defensive minds in football, and they have Jack Kelly and Max Elford and Hunter Clegg and Keanu Tanuvasa, who are great players. And some of these players, I imagine, will get a look on Sundays, and they've done a good job of keeping some of their good players. The culture at BYU, the staff there, the development is not so dissimilar from their rival Utah, where I've praised Kyle Whittingham and their staff and their culture and development and what they bring to the table. I mean, what is better than a rivalry game that is close, that's back and forth, that's competitive? And add on top of that, they're not just talented teams, but they have good coaching staffs. They are wise. They know how to budget. They keep the good players they can keep realistically. They know how to develop. They know how to scout. They do more with less. I was just talking about this in my Minnesota-Nebraska segment, where Minnesota squeezes as much talent as they can out of their roster. These two teams do the same thing. And ultimately, BYU won this game because they were +2 in turnovers, and they had 2 fewer fourth down failures than Utah did. Essentially, Utah was -4 in the turnover battle, if you count the fourth down stops as turnovers. They were -4, and they nearly won. So, not that moral victories exist, and this is a very painful loss for Utah. However, it was a hostile environment. This is a good team. Not great, not elite, but good. And you still have your destiny in front of you. You still can define the Kyle Whittingham era positively by winning out. And Cincinnati and Texas Tech, I mean, they play each other. BYU, they have to travel to Iowa State. That's going to be a really tough task. And they also have to travel to Cincinnati, play TCU. Correction, Cincinnati does not play Texas Tech, but they play Baylor. They play at Utah. They host BYU. They travel to TCU. It's still chaos in the Big 12. Utah's hopes are still alive, and to a certain degree, they do have control over their destiny. Certainly have control of how they're viewed. If they finish the year 10-2, they'll be ranked. They could win 11 games in the bowl game, and whether Kyle Whittingham decides to retire or not, it will be a successful season regardless. It's a great game between 2 great teams and programs. Just one of them had to lose, and that happened to be Utah this Saturday night. And for BYU, it's their 3rd straight Holy War win. This is a very serious rivalry. It's among one of the better rivalries in football, especially when both teams and programs are good, and they are good. They are healthy. I like that BYU joined a conference, and now we get this game annually. It's incredible. So, great win for BYU. Utah, I imagine, is going to recover and still have a successful season. You know who else is going to have a successful season? Texas Tech and Arizona State. I know that Arizona State beating Tech and stunning them might change your mind about who Texas Tech is. It doesn't really change my mind because analytically, Tech was top 3. On paper, entering this game, they were the second best team in the country, I think. So if you only care about the paper, and I'll get to this later in more detail in the segment, Indiana was 1, Tech was 2, and Ohio State was 3. If all you cared about was this season's results and looking at them with nuance, I think those were the top 3 teams. And maybe there'd even be an argument that Oregon would be better than Ohio State. Maybe, because, Indiana is way better than Ohio State's best win. But priors are important, and priors being important is best identified in a game like this, because Ohio State doesn't lose this game. Ohio State goes into ASU and definitely wins. I mean, maybe I shouldn't go that far, but I think they do. And I'll get more into why. So Arizona State stuns Texas Tech. Upset. It was a game that was very one-sided until the very, very end, where due to a special teams blunder and due to Texas Tech's sheer talent and backup QB, who is talented, he'll be a great starter for them after Morton leaves. I think he doesn't have any more eligibility after this year. So Will Hammond is your Red Raiders starting quarterback in 2026, at least to my projection and knowledge. He willed them down the field, got him into the end zone. Lee Hunter makes an amazing sack where he, as you would expect with Texas Tech's D-line, they blow up Arizona State's offensive line. Get to Leavitt. Leavitt's frustrated. Texas Tech has 2 punt returners back. And I think Arizona State wanted to kick to, I forget if it was the left or right-handed side. I forget. But he wanted to kick to one side. I believe it was the right side. And he ends up kicking to the left, and then a juke move here, a missed tackle here, and the returner goes to the left-hand side of the field from the Texas Tech perspective, the left hash mark from their perspective, and he's out at like the 10. And then they punch it in with a quick pass, easy, and get the 2-point conversion, and you're thinking to yourself, at least I was, Arizona State controlled this game for like 58 minutes, and they're going to blow it because Texas Tech's just way more talented than them. Way more. Well, I still think Texas Tech's more talented, and given they almost won that game with a backup QB, with a late notice that one of their starting D tackles is out for the year, and the fact that this was always going to be, I think, a tough game based on how it went. And I think, given how the how the Utah and Arizona State game went last weekend, I think knowing Jeff Sims was going to be the quarterback, Arizona State probably threw that game in the trash and started preparing for this game early on. Given all of that, and Texas Tech almost wins, Tech's the better team. But Arizona State was the better team on that day, and they won. And they showed why Kenny Dillingham is one of the best coaches in the Big 12 in America, and why, they're to be taken seriously. They only have one Big 12 loss. Their other loss came to Mississippi State. They had a blowout loss to Utah. It's on the road. You play your backup QB, Jeff Sims, who's pretty trash. You're not going to win that game. But at home, in Tempe, sold-out crowd, Tech has a backup QB. You wonder how many games in a row can Tech get up to play in. And Morton is better than Hammond. There's a reason they had sort of a slow and off start against Utah after he was put in, and they had a lull. There's a reason they had that against Kansas, and you saw that there was a reason why they had that here. Morton's better. He's a better fit for what they want to do. He's a better quarterback. I think Hammond probably has higher upside, but Morton's the better overall quarterback right now. And Arizona State took advantage. They made sure that Texas Tech couldn't dominate on the ground like they wanted to. And outside of that, with Leavitt and with Tyson, they were able to move methodically down the field enough to not really get into the end zone, but kick a field goal here, a field goal there. Eventually in the third quarter, they score a touchdown. And at one point, they had a 98.4% chance to win. And they almost blew that, but then marched right down the field. And that was all Sam Leavitt and Jordan Tyson. Good thing he's healthy and is fully recovered from his injury last year. Tyson on the year has 628 receiving yards and 8 receiving touchdowns. Just incredible. Arizona State only ran the ball for 2.1 yards per carry, by the way. That's factoring in sacks. And Texas Tech had 10 TFLs, but Leavitt was able to do enough through the air and enough scrambling behind the scenes to move the team in between the 20s. Tech only ran the ball for 4 yards per carry. That's pretty low for what Cameron Dickey and Hammond and Jacoby Williams typically do. That's much lower than Tech wants to. And they run naturally more of an air raid offense. So they're going to go more pass heavy. And they had to at the end of the game anyway, because Arizona State at one point was up 19-7. At that point, you do have to, dig into your bag and start looking at this game through the eyes of the quarterback and the wide receiver. That's what you have to start doing. That was stunning by Arizona State. That was a fantastic game plan. They executed it at a high level, and I'm impressed. I'm impressed by Kenny Dillingham, by his staff, and his players. I mean, they have a true future NFL wide receiver and quarterback. They plan all around that. Raleek Brown, former Trojan Raleek Brown, has been outstanding at running back. USC had him at running back. They decided to move him to receiver for some reason. He's moved back to running back, and he's a star for Arizona State. Like, he's doing really well. And defensively, they're good enough, especially up front, where they love to stack the box and send pressure, to where they will make you beat them through the air. And Hammond just was not consistent enough to muster that up early on. So Arizona State gets on top. They get on top big. And after nearly choking it, they have enough juice, just enough to get through and earn a massive upset win that shakes up the college football playoff race, and that puts them back into the college football playoff race. Phenomenal game by Arizona State. As for Texas Tech, if they simply win out, I still think they're in the Big 12 championship game. Like, if they just win out, and even if, say, they win out and, say, Arizona State wins out, how would that look? Just really quickly here, out of curiosity, before we move on. I mean, if Texas Tech wins out, they beat BYU, so they get the head-to-head right there, and BYU drops a game. If Arizona State wins out, they don't play Cincinnati or BYU. So if everyone wins out, like the top 4 teams all win out, which won't happen, but somehow Tech would probably get an at-large bid, I would assume, at 11-1. Because if Arizona State wins out and Tech wins out and Cincy wins out, Arizona State probably gets in over Tech and over BYU, and they play Cincinnati, and I don't know who would win there, but I think Arizona State would match up well with Cincinnati. So, like, if Arizona State's 11-2 Big 12 champion and Tech's 11-1 and their only loss was a close game with a backup QB, a Big 12 gets 2 teams in, which is pretty phenomenal. We'll now talk about Indiana and Michigan State, is what we will discuss now. Wow, we've been live for just over an hour. We've already gotten like 6 topics done. This is good, but we'll yeah. Let me check the chat before we move on here. Okay, going for gold _85, injured during game, broken finger / hand. Ouch. Ouch, that sucks. That really sucks. Oh, hope Rocco Spindler heals up. That's really, really unfortunate. It's very unfortunate there. Indiana beats Michigan State. The Hoosiers started off the game asleep at the wheel, defensively at least. Or maybe Michigan State was just awake and they were on fire and they wanted their coach to survive. And it didn't matter. Indiana still pulled away. Fernando Mendoza and Elijah Surratt and Omar Cooper Jr. looked like they were C.J. Stroud, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, and Jackson Smith and Jigba when they were playing Michigan State in 2021. That's how this game looked with Indiana's offense against Michigan State's defense. That's exactly how this looked. And then Indiana, at the end of the game, ran it, and actually kind of ran it at will after getting up big enough, and they just wanted to close the game out and preserve their depth. That's about how this game went. Aiden Childs and Nick Marsh, Amari Kelly, Cre'Shawn McCray, they played about as perfect as a game as you could against this Indiana defense. Indiana runs a lot of zone. They don't run much man. And they just found holes in between the zone over and over and over again. And Childs displayed that, look, he could be a future NFL quarterback. I don't know if he'll stay at Michigan State after this year, as I expect Jonathan Smith to sadly get fired, even though I was high on him. We're all wrong at times. Marsh is a future NFL receiver, and McCray and Kelly could have futures there too. But Indiana, they also have a future NFL QB. Who isn't just a maybe, he's a definite. Fernando Mendoza is probably at this point the first quarterback taken off the board in the 2026 NFL draft. Surratt is a day 2 pick, I would say, at receiver. Cooper Jr. is a day 3 guy. You have an offensive line with Carter Smith, Pat Coogan, Bray Lynch, Drew Evans, and Khalil Benson. They're big, they're physical, do an excellent job in run block and pass block in particular, I would say. And defensively, you got Michael Kamara, Isaiah Jones, Elijah Hardy, Aiden Fisher. Awesome defensive front, and then D'Angelo Pons, Lewis Moore, and Amari Farrell in the backfield. What more can you ask for? I mean, Indiana looked like a complete team that could have won by more if they weren't coming off of an emotional win or if they wanted to run up the score more. That's what this game looked like. They finished strong. After a little bit of a shaky start, Michigan State barely covered. They had to get a late field goal to cover. And I would argue, though I couldn't see it, but it felt like Indiana had a touchdown on that 4th and 4 that they ran, and he got his toe down before his heel. Could be wrong there. It did feel like Indiana kind of got like a touchdown taken off the board to give mercy to Michigan State. Again, could be wrong there, and it was called incomplete on the field. You need indisputable evidence up top to overturn it. Probably pretty similar to what happened with, I think it was Malachi Fields' attempted catch against USC, where CJ Carr threw a nice ball. Fields got his toe down, it looked like, just before his heel, but it was ruled incomplete on the field, and it happened so quickly that there just wasn't enough to overturn that evidence. There was not. I think Indiana, through a game like this, has shown that they are one of the nation's best, if not the nation's best team. And I say that, and I do not say that with caution. I just trying to make sure I'm saying the right thing. I say that with conviction because great teams play like this. Great teams only get 1 penalty for 5 yards. They get 4 sacks. And when they have a 3 or 4 minute possession disadvantage and they're outscored in the first quarter, they dominate. They rebound. they perform at an incredibly high level. I mean, you can look at the game on paper stats for this game. They were nuts. It was bananas what Indiana was doing to Michigan State efficiency-wise. It was bananas. Just look at these numbers or listen to these numbers. Also look at the numbers on screen. I know that they're close in some regard, but Indiana dominated after that first quarter. Numbers for this game. Indiana was in the 99th, 98th, 97th, 5th percentile in just about almost any category you could ask for. Indiana, they're absolutely phenomenal. They're one of the better teams in America. They could be the best team in America. I love what I'm seeing out of them. And I personally think that they're going to go 12-0. They should go 12-0. And they're going to be in Indy. And win or lose there, you got there, you're 12-0, you're guaranteed a spot, a home game, or a bye in the 12-team playoff. That's it. That's phenomenal. I mean, Childs had a 94.8 QBR. He probably had his best game of the season. Michigan State only averaged 3.1 yards per carry for 74 yards, and 64 of those came from a long run from Childs. Michigan State only had 3 tackles for loss. I mean, Indiana was averaging 12 yards per pass attempt. The Hoosiers, they averaged 0.43 EPA per play. They had a 59% success rate. They averaged 12 yards per drop back, 8.36 yards per play, and they had a 35% defensive run stuffing rate and a 13% havoc rate. And Michigan State, objectively, like even factoring out the opponent they were playing, played better than they did against UCLA. Michigan State, in this game to start off in the first quarter, and my correction, Michigan State didn't outscore them in the first quarter. At one point, they took the lead, and they almost outscored them in the first quarter, but they didn't. Michigan State, they had scoring drives of 7 minutes and 8 minutes long to begin the game. Like, they intentionally slowed down the clock, were very methodical with scripted drives. You know, the only hope they had of winning was compressing the game. It didn't matter. It did not matter. Indiana smacked them like a fly swatter destroying a bug. That's what this game looked like. And it was an impressive win for Indiana, given the emotional win they were coming off of, given the fact they do not have Ohio State or Oregon levels of blue chip talent, and given how Michigan State played. Michigan State played probably one of their better games of the year offensively and even probably defensively too, given how they were doing against the run early. Indiana's worst is just that much better than Michigan State's best. That was my takeaway from this game. My takeaway from Georgia Ole Miss is that the SEC needs defense. Georgia won a shootout over Ole Miss, and the great thing about this game is that Georgia has shown they can win with offense. They couldn't do that last year, and traditionally under Kirby Smart, they've won with defense. Now, defensively, I think they have some issues to work through. They have to get better at certain things. But to be able to rely on Gunnar Stockton to do what he needs to do, to score over 40 points in a game when your defense can't get a stop to save its life until the fourth quarter, to rely on him to do that, even when the ground game isn't working exactly as I and many others expected it would against Ole Miss, to do that is phenomenal. I think they have found their own version of Stetson Bennett again in Gunnar Stockton. His QBR is second, and what he is doing with these receivers, the offensive line, the running backs, the offensive game plan, and how he is able to, at times, put this team on his back to win, even with the defensive failures, is impressive. Ole Miss had an impressive outing for the sole reason that to move the ball that way on a Kirby Smart defense is phenomenal, regardless of your talent level. They scored 35 points in 3 quarters. 35 points in 3 quarters. That's what Ole Miss did. And they didn't have much of a ground game either. They didn't have this balanced attack. They had receivers breaking tackles, receivers outrunning Georgia corners. Their offense looked at times more athletic than Georgia's defense. And Lane Kiffin was making adjustments before Georgia could make adjustments to their defense. Eventually, it fell apart in the fourth quarter. You saw Trinidad Chambliss had limited talent. Georgia caught up in the adjustments game, began to shut down Ole Miss and that Lane Kiffin offense. And yeah, Georgia's the better team. And I think that if this game were to be played again, Georgia probably wins by more than 8 points. Probably. Because I think Georgia's better talent, a better staff. Ole Miss was clearly looking ahead when they played Washington State to fight in this game. And indeed, they fought and they performed well. But Georgia put up 510 yards, 34 first downs. They controlled the clock for 37 minutes and 39 seconds of possession. Had a great game from Gunnar Stockton. Josh McCray, by the way, got stopped behind the line of scrimmage, spins forward, extends, jumps to get the 1 yard necessary to convert. MVP. Any of Georgia's running backs they have last year don't do that. That's what he was at Illinois. It's what he is at Georgia. He's a power back. Getting him out of the portal in the spring window, that was a good move. That move may have single-handedly, depending on how Georgia does with the rest of its schedule, may have given Georgia a home playoff game or even a first-round bye instead of having them sit at home from the playoffs or have to go on the road in the first round. That's why you make those tiny moves, those tiny adjustments, are for winning the small moments or one individual moment, one individual play in any given game. And Ole Miss, look, they played well. They did. They were a good team. They've shown themselves to be a good team, and I think they're better coached than they are last year. I think this is one of Lane Kiffin's better coaching jobs, if not maybe his best coaching job as a coach. But when you have 60 plays and Georgia runs 80 and they control the clock the way they did, and Gunnar Stockton's able to be 26 of 31 for 289 yards and 4 touchdowns, and he has 59 rushing yards and a touchdown on the ground. You made Gunnar Stockton look like the college equivalent of NFL MVP Lamar Jackson. And you can't get much pressure, and you do your best to stop the run, but Georgia, when taking out the sacks and kneel downs, averages like 5 yards per carry on the ground and 0.28 EPA per rush, which is, or 0.2 EPA per rush. That's a lot. Georgia averaged 0.64 EPA per pass attempt, by the way. 2% havoc rate, though, for Georgia forced. Ole Miss only forced an 8%. So Georgia's offense, their O-line is better than it was last year from a college standpoint. Receivers way better. Tight end is better. Everything about Georgia's offense is way better. Georgia, for the life of their team, cannot get to the quarterback, though. It's not like Ole Miss has this great offensive line. I saw plays where Georgia, they send 6, and the 5 offensive linemen there in protection just stop them. Stone cold line of scrimmage, and Chambliss is all day to throw. Chambliss put up impressive numbers. He himself had a good game. You could tell at the end, though, that Stockton was more talented. Like, Stockton's more naturally gifted, and he has the better staff. He has the more talented team. Georgia's the better offensive line, better backs, and with how their offense is humming, I can honestly say they probably have the better offense, even if Kiffin is a better play caller and better offensive mind than Mike Bobo. That's why Georgia won 43-35. They both control their own destiny, though. This is not a program loss for Ole Miss. Ole Miss would trade losing this game the way they did for that win over Georgia they earned last year all day. From that game last year up until now, I think Kiffin and his program have broken through in a major way. They're 4.5, 3.5 point underdogs from an early line perspective at Oklahoma this weekend, coming weekend. They could lose that game and win out and potentially still be in. If they win that game and if they beat Oklahoma on the road, they're probably winning out. They're definitely in the playoffs. This is a well-coached Ole Miss team that does more with less. Last year's team, I think, did less with more. This year's Ole Miss team does more with less, and that shows a real maturity of Kiffin to be able to still be that, same explosive personality on the internet, to speak his mind, to still be himself, but coach better. And, bringing in a D2 quarterback like Trinidad Chambliss and transforming him into one of the better quarterbacks in the Power 4 this year. Let me shout out these two quarterbacks once again before we end this segment. Chambliss has 8 touchdowns, 1 interception, 1,549 passing yards, and 323 rushing yards with 5 rushing touchdowns, 155.7 passer rating, and an 84.4 QBR, which is 8th nationally. Gunnar Stockton has 1,553 passing yards, 10 touchdowns, 1 interception. He has 279 rushing yards and 7 rushing touchdowns, a 151.2 passer rating, and a 91 QBR, which is 2nd. And that is through 7 games where they've played Auburn's defense, one of the best defenses in America. Ole Miss at home, their defense isn't amazing, but putting up the numbers he did with a 204 passer rating is still really good. Played Alabama's defense. It did overall okay, good in that game. Played Tennessee on the road, got pressured a ton in that matchup. Still had a good game. He put the team on his back in that game and led them to a win there. You got to appreciate these quarterbacks. Those are two of the best quarterbacks in not just the SEC, but in all of America. And the odds are that both will be in the playoff, more likely than just one of them will, I would say, after this Saturday. But we'll see. Now we can talk about Oregon destroying Rutgers, and that was indeed a destruction. That was, oh man, I gotta feel bad for Rutgers, man. I can tell that they are not where Schiano wants them to be, but it's too late to control that. You can't control that, and if not for Oregon being willing to show mercy to Rutgers, they could have made it 100-3. And the 3 points were based off a turnover where they didn't get any yards. It's just so crazy. So crazy. What happened there between the Ducks and the Scarlet Knights. They scored, 56 points in 45 minutes. Over a point per minute. Gotta blow my nose here real quick, sorry. Okay, threw that away, and we're back. Let's discuss Oregon trouncing Rutgers. I said earlier this year, okay. Sorry about that. I said earlier this year that Oregon had the most room out of any of the top teams to grow, and that there was a chance they had the highest ceiling in college football. And I think a game like this, along with how Indiana performed when they were sleepwalking for the first 15, 20, 25 minutes of the game, can potentially back that opinion. Oregon scored over a point per minute. They averaged over 10 yards per pass attempt throughout the day through their starting quarterback, Dante Moore. They even got the backup in, Brock Thomas. They averaged 14 yards per pass attempt, 11.3 yards per rushing attempt. They had 3 sacks, 8 total TFLs, 2 interceptions. Ethan Kaliakmanis didn't even complete 33% of his passes against Oregon. He had a 42.5 passer rating and 11 QBR. That is his worst game of his career at Rutgers, even worse than last year's games against Nebraska and Wisconsin. Going back to 2023, worst game since his performance against Michigan, where he had a 7.4 QBR, but he had a better passer rating. And in 2022, worst game since he had to come in late a true freshman against Illinois in 2022. 6.4 QBR with a negative 9.5 passer rating. And Kyle McManus has looked good this year. KJ Duff, TJ Sheffield, really good receiver core. And Oregon just said that none of that matters because we are just that much more athletic than you, stronger than you, bigger than you, physical than you. We are better coached than you are. That was the most impressive performance of Week 8, was what Oregon did to Rutgers. You went across the country after just a few weeks ago going across the country to Penn State. You were coming off of an emotional hangover spot, losing to Indiana at home, and Indiana kind of humiliating Oregon at home, ending that long win streak, bullying them at the lines of scrimmage, having superior QB play, coaching circles around them. You had all the reason to come in a little bit sad and hungover and a bit, whiny and complaining that you have to travel all the way out to Piscataway of all places. And good place, by the way. Schiano's done a good job at that program, and I hope that they are able to rebound from this. But Oregon just was not having any of that. Oregon, I think, has the best lines of scrimmage in college football. They are up there. Notre Dame is. Miami is. Indiana is. Those are the four that immediately come out to me when I think of lines of scrimmage. And right now, I think Oregon's first. I think what Oregon can do O-line and D-line wise, at least in terms of their ceiling, is above what anyone else can do in football. Just the size and depth they have there. They were getting effortlessly to the second level on Rutgers' defensive front. Now, Rutgers' defense is trash. It's one of the worst defenses. So the fact Oregon was going to score a lot of points didn't exactly shock me. But the fact that they held Rutgers, I keep saying Oregon, but it's almost like Oregon was playing its own scout team on Saturday. That's how dominant they were. The fact they held Rutgers to 123 rushing yards and 2.9 yards per carry, and a lot of those came at the end of the game. Rutgers had that touchdown drive in the fourth quarter that was 30 yards, Jayshon Benjamin 7-yard run with 6 minutes 40 seconds left. Oregon was playing their second and third stringers on defense. Tosh Lupoy, who I have lobbed plenty of criticism against, especially last year with how their defense was inconsistent against Ohio State, against Penn State. They have transformed this defense. Him and Lanning and Tony Tuioti and Chris Hampton, they have transformed this unit. It's impressive. I would argue to this degree it is Oregon or Ohio State for the best reloading job in football. Now, Ohio State, it's more obvious they've reloaded because they're number one, they're undefeated, and because of what they did to Oregon last year. But what they did to Oregon last year is also an argument for why Oregon has done the best job at reloading. Because Ohio State last year was, 2 scores better than Oregon neutral field. Probably. Is Ohio State better than Oregon by 2 scores neutral field this year? Because the best way to decide between those two teams as to who's reloaded better at the top is to take the difference between last year's point spread on a neutral field between Ohio State and Oregon and this year's. If it's a larger spread in favor of Ohio State, because I think Ohio State would still be favored right now over this year's Oregon. If it's a larger spread, then Ohio State's done the better job of reloading. If it's a shorter one, then Oregon's done the better job at reloading. I think that's pretty simple, pretty objective. We don't know the answer to that right now because they haven't played, and it's still early enough in the year, especially with the schedules they've ran, where Oregon played a team in Penn State that was probably top 10 at the time they played them, but ever since then has fallen off a cliff. That affects metrics. The only other big team they've really played is Indiana at home. Ohio State, they've played a Texas team that I think at the time they played them was top 10, but ever since then they've fallen off. Don't know if they're still top 10. And outside of that, they haven't really played anyone special outside of maybe Illinois and Washington on the road, and they're not nearly as good as Indiana, and I don't think any of those teams were as good as Penn State was when Oregon played them. So still a lot of unknown and a lot of room to grow for both of those teams and for most teams in college football. But to average 12.5 yards per play and hold Rutgers to 2.97. To have a 13% havoc rate and hold Rutgers to 8%, and that factors in some garbage time stuff. To have a 15% explosive play rate and hold Rutgers to a 6%, and to average 0.46 expected points added per play and hold Rutgers to a negative 0.17. Bonkers stuff. I mean, that is national title caliber stuff. At the end of the day, Oregon had 27.13 total EPA. Rutgers had a negative 10.36. That's national title caliber stuff. That is one of the more dominant performances of the year that I've seen so far, and the most dominant and most impressive, I would say, in Week 8. So congratulations to Dan Lanning and Will Stein and Tosh Lupo. I thought a lot of Oregon fans were overreacting after that Indiana game. Watch Indiana play Michigan State, where Aiden Childs and those receivers did the best job they could against Indiana's defense, only mustered 13 points despite intentionally shorting the game with their long drives, and Indiana casually put up 38 like it was just another day. Indiana's a real top 4, top 3, top 2 team. They could even be number 1 for all I know. They happen to utilize the bye better, and they happen to be better coached on that day, and they're also older too. So their experience, I think, played out in that game and was beneficial to them. The longer Oregon goes on, every play they earn, every additional game they play in, they are going to get better. And this is more so the case with Oregon than with any other team in football because of the youth they have at receiver, at secondary, at parts on the defensive line and defense overall. And the fact that, look, Dante Moore learning a new system, reinventing himself as a quarterback, in a lot of ways, he's much more similar to Julian Sayin than he is, let's say, to Luke Altmaier, and Kaliak Manis, where despite the fact that he had starting experience entering this year, technically, you could wash and rinse all of that away. New system, new university, new expectations, and he's a wonderful quarterback. He had a wonderful game. Good job on Oregon responding to adversity as national champions do. As for Rutgers, I don't know what else to say outside of the fact that you're limited. You need to get better players. And with, you returned technically a lot in production from last year, but your schedule's much tougher this year than it was last year. And last year's team wasn't all that special. So I don't know where they go from here. Still think Schiano's a good coach, but Lanning, even with better job and better resources, is a far better coach. And he has far better players at literally every position outside of maybe wide receiver 2, but at this point, DeCorian Moore would be wide receiver 1 on both of those teams. And shout out to him and Kenyon Sadiq for being absolute freaks. Now talking about Ohio State dominating Wisconsin, it's going to be a similar story to Oregon Rutgers. I don't take as much away from it because Wisconsin's quit, and I don't think Rutgers is quit. And the travel and just the timing of everything is not the same. I expected Ohio State to probably shut out Wisconsin and score 30 points, if not like 40. I did not think that Oregon would make Rutgers look like a rag doll here. Ohio State did what was expected of them. They covered the 27.5-point line. They pitched a shutout. Wisconsin is just an absolute mess. I think the team in large part has quit. They have no depth. They're full of injuries. And Ohio State's one of the best teams in America, if not the best team in America. So when you match up those things, well, you get pretty insane and lopsided results, as we did on Saturday on CBS. That is a game that I don't know why they put it on CBS. It didn't deserve to be. And then that's not because Ohio State isn't a good team or Wisconsin's not a good program. No, both are true, but this was always going to be a horrific mismatch. I mean, at the end of the day, Wisconsin had a negative 13.81 EPA. Ohio State had 17.6 EPA. It was thorough domination. Ohio State's defense once again leading the way, pitching a shutout. And as for Ohio State's offense, their rushing attack is not good, and their passing attack is elite, which is kind of what I think everyone who looked at Ohio State and researched them honestly thought they were going to be entering the year. Very questionable run offense, epic passing offense, and defensively they were going to be, I didn't think they'd be this good, but I thought that they would at least somewhat reload and that the Patricia hire would at least work out this year. It's more than worked out. It's excelling. If they continue putting up these numbers, they will have a generational defense at the end of the year. Of course, playing Wisconsin will help those numbers look elite, maybe even better than they actually are, because Wisconsin's playing, a second-string quarterback, a third-string quarterback. They lost to Michigan, got destroyed by Iowa 37-0. Ohio State beats them 34-0. Like, they were always going to win in a big way. But it's impressive to see the defense reload the way it has. It's impressive to see the receivers play at the level they have. We already knew Ohio State was impressive, but just seeing it happen again, them putting on a dominant game, doesn't change the fact that it's impressive. And you can appreciate that. Appreciating that Julian Sayin had 42 pass attempts on 36 completions for 4 touchdowns and 393 total yards. Ohio State, they ran 70 plays, which is rare given their pace of play. But that's because Wisconsin had to constantly punt. They only had 46 plays. So Ohio State had all the time in the world, all the opportunity in the world to score, to play well. They had 33 minutes and 57 seconds of possession. They held Wisconsin to 144 total yards and forced a turnover, held them to 9 first downs. Wisconsin, I think, late in the game got into Ohio State territory but couldn't get any points out of it. And that's that. 34-0. Ohio State wins big. And the only question for them moving forward is the same, I would argue, as Oregon, Indiana, and Alabama. It's things that they're maybe not good at, but are at worst average at. So Alabama and Ohio State have average rushing offenses. And that's something that can be a bit of a kryptonite there. Alabama also has some questions at stopping the run, I would say. You look at Indiana, they don't have really any specific statistical questions or questions in terms of balance, but they do have questions as to how many alien players do they actually have. And for Oregon, I think the question is, more how much of a known are they actually? Because Oregon on paper doesn't have a weakness in rushing offense. It's like Indiana, except they lost to Indiana. Indiana had less talent than them, and Oregon was a 7.5-point favorite. And their previous best win over Penn State, or currently even their best win over Penn State, Penn State's now 3-4. So who is Oregon? We'll figure that out as the season goes on. For Ohio State, I think we know who they are. They are a defensive-led team, and just below that, they're led by their passing offense. And the rushing offense is something that, if they want to cement their title-winning chances, they got to figure out. I mean, Bo Jackson was held to 2.6 yards per carry. Wisconsin is a really good rushing defense, but the fact that Michigan looked sloppy at home against Wisconsin, and I think that, Wisconsin coming off a bye probably didn't have the same quit or injured feeling they did in this game against Ohio State. The fact Michigan ran better without the same threat through the air than Ohio State did against this Wisconsin team, that if they didn't quit by the Michigan game, they are totally done right now. That is something that is definitely a yellow flag, if not a red flag. It's the same thing with Alabama's rushing offense. It's the same thing possibly with Indiana's blue chip ratio. Same thing with the fact that Oregon against Penn State and Indiana has looked overall questionable at different points. Same thing. But I'm impressed with Ohio State. They're in the tier 1 of college football. They should be favored to win it all at this point, undefeated. Easier schedule ahead. They have the 2 best players in the sport, maybe even the 3 best players in the sport if you're factoring in Arvell Reese, with Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs. They owned the Badgers. They owned them. and deservingly so. Ryan Day knows what his team's strengths are. He knows that you have to do certain things to win a national championship and to be one of the best coaches and programs in America. Luke Fickell, maybe he does. Maybe he knows that, but he hasn't shown it at Wisconsin. I feel like that's not the same man that was coaching at Cincinnati. I think he tried too much to do different things, and it's ultimately going to cost him his job because I don't see how he survives at Wisconsin. Even if they keep him until next year, I don't exactly see how he survives. Just look at the stats, guys. Total dominance in every category except for rushing yards, and Ohio State had the better rushing offense, at least earlier in the game. So, win by Ohio State, big win. They get a bye this coming week, and then they have to play Penn State, Purdue, UCLA, Rutgers, and Michigan. The only game they're going to lose there is Michigan, and that's a maybe. They'll be favored in their remaining games, probably favored in Indianapolis. So we'll see. Ohio State dominates Wisconsin. Same old, just as impressive regardless. Speaking of Penn State, though, that was a painful, and I mean painful, loss to Iowa. Let me check the Super Chats before we move on, because someone may have decided to donate. Oh, boy, Going for Gold, thank you for your support. I appreciate that. So we have some Super Chats here to get on to. Let me quickly answer these from Going for Gold _85. The thing about Indiana and SIG that always impresses me about is their killer instinct. If they're up by 2 scores, they become sharks with blood in the water and will win by 3.5+ scores. That's exactly it, Going for Gold _85. That's just facts. That's facts. I think they're the best coached team in America, and I don't think it's particularly close. Ohio State and Oregon and Alabama and Georgia are well coached, but I don't think they're close to Indiana. For Indiana to be in the conversation with those teams without those teams' talent means they're out coaching them. Or maybe they're just out-developed, but even in-game, I think they're out-coaching them too. I don't just think they're out-developing them from a preseason, strength and conditioning or workouts or scouting angle. Your other Super Chat, by the way, thank you for the $10, but for the $4 Super Chat, I don't care how good Ohio State is, Wisconsin should never accept 76 total yards through 3 quarters. Too storied and respectable of a program for that. Agreed. Yeah, Fickell should be fired. Fickell should be dead, like in terms of his career with Wisconsin. Not dead, literally, that's wrong. His career at Wisconsin should be dead. It should be, and it probably already is. We'll move on, though, talk about Iowa beating Penn State. The Hawkeyes win in Hawkeye fashion. Rushing offense, defense, turnovers, and winning a close game at home in Kinnick at night. 25-24. If you're a Penn State fan, this is so bittersweet. And that's because you looked like the better team, I would argue, for the vast majority of the game. You were clearly more talented than Iowa. But Iowa has a head coach, and you have an interim head coach. And Kirk Ferentz knows how to win these type of games. It's at night in Kinnick. If this were in Happy Valley, Penn State probably wins. And I don't think the coordinator buy-in is there. I don't think the team roster buy-in is even there. The team was definitely more bought in here than they were against UCLA or Northwestern. But the coaches, the coordinators, I've watched Andy Kotelnicki and I've watched Jim Knowles coach. And Kotelnicki, for the majority of this year, has not been good. But I've seen him at Kansas. I saw him at Penn State last year where, despite not having any receivers, they had a pretty effective offense in different games. Not the case this year. And Jim Knowles, I watched him at Ohio State for 3 years. He had success at Oklahoma State. This is on track to being a worse defense than the 2022 defense. And that is despite this Penn State team defensively having better personnel than that 2022 Ohio State defense, which just had awful DB play, very overrated defensive line and linebacker play. Look, the season was a failure after that UCLA game, and if they were going to show signs of life, they would have showed it against Northwestern. I would argue they would have shown it against UCLA. They didn't. Here they showed more signs of life, but the staff additions that I thought were wonderful were not. The coordinators didn't pan out. Again, I blame most of this on Franklin. I do, but again, I should have never picked Franklin to win it all. They internally should have expected to, but outside, Franklin winning it all, especially with hindsight after how this season went, no. If he cared more about getting the job right and making sure his career wouldn't be tainted, should have probably resigned after that UCLA game. Because, look, Ethan Grunkmeyer, maybe he has a future. He had some good throws, but Iowa's defense clamped him down. Wampka, TJ Hall, Deshaun Lee. So the beauty with Iowa, and what's bittersweet for Penn State, is this. Iowa lost almost half of its production from last year and got better. Penn State returned over 60% of its production and, in theory, had a lot of, day 2, day 1 NFL talent come back and upgraded at DC. I don't think anyone will debate seriously that Jim Knowles is worse than Tom Allen. And yet, everything regresses. Offense collapses, passing attack especially, but also gets worse on the ground, and the defense overall gets worse. The only thing that's improved is the special teams unit. That's it. Where they're better at blocking field goals, blocking punts, making field goals, and they're better at punting. That's the only area that's improved. The only one. Kind of crazy. Penn State dropped its 4th game. Iowa is now 5-2, and they control their own destiny, in theory. I know they play at UCL. I know they play at USC. I know they play at Nebraska. I know they play Oregon, thankfully for them, at home. But what if Iowa wins out? They're in the playoff. I said preseason there's a shot for this team to win 9 games, or maybe, if everything goes well, win 10 games. Well, Penn State isn't who we thought they were. They are not. You get Minnesota at home. Michigan State is a complete dumpster fire. You get Oregon at home. And you'd have to travel to Nebraska. And I think there's one more game mixed in there you have to travel to USC. You're probably not winning out. In fact, you're probably not even winning 9 games. But you control your own destiny. You have awesome lines of scrimmage play, a top 10 defense, a top 50, I would say, offense when Gronowski's healthy. You've just played a talented Penn State defense that I would say is probably good at worst in all aspects outside of defending mobile QBs. You played a top 5 defense, if not top 3 or top 2 defense in Indiana. And Iowa State's defense is good when healthy, and especially at home in Jack Trice Stadium. You have a great team, and your special teams are awesome too. So, look, Penn State, they had a chance to win, but I think a lot of that was on talent alone. And the fact that they were playing an inspired effort. Kirk Ferentz made a mind-bogglingly awful decision trying to kick that 66-yard field goal. I have no idea what he was doing there. No idea whatsoever. If Iowa doesn't try that, they probably win by double digits. And even my thoughts are a little bit changed. That was bad. And that's one of those flukish plays that deservingly so changes your perspective on the game. That was such a bad decision that makes me question whether or not maybe Iowa has the talent to win out or win 9 games, but they make a really errant decision on the way from the staff, and it messes everything up. Again, Iowa goes into half up 10-0, and they probably win, say, 26-17. That's probably what happens if they they don't even attempt that. That was a really dumb-headed, mind-boggling decision. That was up there with Tennessee calling play action at the 1 to throw a pick six 99 yards. That is how dumb of a decision that was by Kirk Ferentz. And yet they still win. And typically when Ferentz makes really dumb decisions like that, Iowa doesn't win because they don't have the talent to make up for that. Especially against a team like Penn State, who isn't as well coached as they are and whose talent I overrated and many others overrated. But they're still more talented than you are, and they showed that in a lot of aspects. Despite that, Iowa wins. They control their own destiny. At this point, if you're Penn State, your goal is to spoil one of Ohio State or Indiana's seasons. That's your goal, is to go into Columbus and somehow win like 12-10, or do the same thing at home against Indiana. Like, that's your season now. And anything outside of that, they're probably not going to hire Terry Smith, even if that happens. You know, God bless him. He's a phenomenal corners coach, great leader of young men in that regard. But Penn State needs either a experienced coordinator from a winning program, or they need a veteran head coach. They do not need a position coach to be promoted. They don't. I liken it to a premium version of what Michigan State did with Harlan Barnett when Mel Tucker was fired. You know, even similar position. Harlan Barnett was their DB's coach and associate head coach. Terry Smith was the same thing for Penn State. That's kind of what I liken this to. You get a great leader of young men, a guy with high character, a guy who knows how to coach his position well, to hold the roster together, to rally the troops, to try and put together some entertaining football here or there, and that's it. And you're searching for a new head coach. I think Penn State will make the right hire. I think this next hire will be an upgrade. As for Iowa, they keep winning, and they look better than they were last year. So, good things happening in Kinnick. They're going to be projected to beat Minnesota this coming weekend. That will be a game we'll give a preview and prediction for. And this week, I'm also going to be discussing my top coaching candidates for the Penn State job. So stay tuned for that. Now, yes, Alabama and Tennessee. How exciting. Alabama and Tennessee. Wonderful, wonderful game. We're about 2 hours in. We'll be done at about 2 hours, 30 minutes. I'm pretty sure. Dude, get over Andy. He's not good. Yeah, it's so painful. It's so painful. Like, my opinion of him is definitely lower. The thing is, and maybe it was a Lance Leipold thing, because he was with Leipold. So part of me is beginning to think it was a Leipold thing, but I don't just want to use this 1 year to write him off. I don't. I don't want to do that. Like, every other season he's been overall successful. I don't want to completely write him off, but he's not elite. He's not anywhere close to elite. I'm curious to see, maybe he goes somewhere else and succeeds. And I have a feeling he will. And if Knowles goes elsewhere, or if Knowles stays next year, he'll probably do better than he is this year. And that will be a major indictment on Franklin. Like, what happened this year was a complete disaster class. No matter what happens, this year for Penn State's worse than last year Florida State. It's like by a mile worse. By a mile. Alabama smoked Tennessee. They took that Volunteer and they put it on a grill, and they cooked that defense. And they cooked that offense too. They owned the Volunteers in every which way. Tennessee technically outgained Alabama in the end. I know, but that's empty calories. That's eating zebra cakes, which I used to love and have kind of outgrown now. I used to love at high school at the cafeteria buying zebra cakes and eating them. Now I am kind of just indifferent to them. That's what Tennessee's yardage was, a bunch of zebra cakes, empty yards. Alabama had the real stuff. They outplayed Tennessee defensively, offensively. Tennessee had some runs going for them, but Alabama, look, they had a good game with Simpson. Their secondary played phenomenally. You know, Zabian Brown making that read at the line of scrimmage, you know, picking off Joey Aguilar and returning it 99 yards to the house. It goes from possibly being, say, 16-14 at the half, or they miss and it's 16-10 at the half to now 23-7 at the half. Crazy momentum swing right there. And Alabama, they had a 13% havoc rate forced. They had 0.46 EPA per drop back. They had a 48% success rate, and their total EPA on the day was 10.94. Tennessee's was 4.21. And Tennessee ran so many more plays than Alabama did too. Again, a lot of empty calories. Alabama dominated in the moments where they needed to. And from the get-go, they looked like the superior team. They covered, they cruised through another big game, and this stretch has been hard for Alabama. So they play Georgia off the bye on the road, then they host Vanderbilt, two teams who are currently ranked inside the top 10, power-rated top 20. They beat them. And they dominated Georgia first half. They dominated Vanderbilt overall. And dominated, I mean just really game control. When you game control a good opponent, that's close to domination. They beat Missouri, didn't really dominate them, but they were the better team from start to finish. And then they dominated Tennessee. And they'll probably dominate South Carolina on the road, who will be the worst team they've played since Wisconsin at home in Week 3. And this team's a better team than they were against Wisconsin in Week 3. You can bet however much money you want to on that. It's free real estate. It's free money. The job Kalen DeBoer's done responding to that Week 1 loss is incredible. And look at where Florida State is. They're 3-4. Alabama could win the national title with a loss to a team with a losing record by double digits. It's real. It's possible. I mean, 2023 Washington was 14-1. They would have matched up better with anyone else outside of Michigan that year. And they nearly lost to Arizona State at home. Like first-year Kenny Dillingham, Arizona State. This is who Kalen DeBoer is. You're going to get up for the big games. You're going to potentially dominate the big games unless there's a real matchup discrepancy like Michigan had over Washington that year. But then the small games, there will be inconsistencies. There will be tired and mentally weak things that happen and players. That's just who DeBoer is, and players take on the identity of their head coach. That's what happens. DeBoer in big games is perhaps the best game manager in football. That's why he's undefeated against Kirby Smart, Steve Sarkisian, and Dan Lanning, who all are managing top 5 recruiting programs and top 5 or 6 jobs in college football right now. That's why. But that's also why he lost to Arizona State and UCLA in 2022, why he lost to Florida State this year, and why he lost to Oklahoma and Vanderbilt last year, and a pretty overrated Tennessee team on the road last year. That's why. That's who Kalen DeBoer is. That's who Alabama is under Kalen DeBoer. So I think moving forward, Alabama is the argument to be the best team in America. I think a game like this is a big reason why, because of how dominant they were. I mean, Tennessee outgained them in passing and rushing. A lot of that was empty calories, and they dominated the big plays. They were better on third down. Tennessee had to go for it on fourth down 5 times. So every yard they were getting outside of a few big plays and a few plays on the ground was painful. It's another big win for Alabama. That's all I can really say on that front. And they're power rated 3rd right now in FPI. They're top 3 in odds to win the title. They're actually 2nd in odds to win the title behind Ohio State. If they were undefeated, they'd be a lot closer to Ohio State than they are right now. And they can win in a variety of ways. They can win leading with defense. They can run the football if need be. They're not great at it, but they can do it. And Ty Simpson and Jeremy Bernard and Ryan Williams, that's a elite passing offense. And their secondary is the best in college football. They have played real passing offenses, wonderful offenses, and they've done a good job limiting them. It's crazy what Alabama has on the perimeter and on the outside. Wonderful team, wonderful staff. As for Tennessee, you control your own destiny too. I mean, you can win out, and if you do, since you have Oklahoma on the schedule, and Vanderbilt, you can probably get into the playoffs if you win out, but you can't afford any more losses. Got the close loss to Georgia. This is a bad loss on the road to Alabama. You got to find a way to rebound and move on. All right, Notre Dame beating USC, and then after that, we're moving on to some final housekeeping stuff. Oh, gosh, why did I mess this up? You get to see all the power ratings and all that different stuff. I'm going to blow my nose, and then we'll be done after these last few segments. Just responding to a text from someone. I'm starving. But good news is we only have this to talk about and a few other games, so let's get right on it. Notre Dame survives USC, beating them 34-24, and putting on an improved performance on defense and an elite performance on the ground game. After yesterday, I think Notre Dame is up there with Oregon in terms of offensive line play. I'm very impressed with what I've seen out of Joe Ottig, Billy Scruth, Anthony Knapp, out of that entire offensive line, and I'm impressed. I'm actually kind of floored at how they did against USC overall, because I know that USC's down a starting center and they're down their top two running backs, but I thought they would do a better job running against Notre Dame than they did. But what Notre Dame did and what Chris Ash and Marcus Freeman decided to do was stack the box and stop the run and make USC beat you through the air. And USC, they tried, and they did beat them through the air more times than Notre Dame beat them through the air. But it just wasn't enough, because I think USC made some bad coaching decisions and Notre Dame made good coaching decisions. These two teams are pretty even. I think Notre Dame's better, but not by a whole lot. And I say that because kickoff return for a touchdown, USC making some boneheaded fourth down calls and a trick play call. A lot more of the flukish plays, the big plays went Notre Dame's way than USC's way. Of course, USC also had that, red zone interception off of CJ Carr, which is kind of a flukish play. But I think on average, in South Bend, Notre Dame wins this game by like 7 points. They win it by a score. Neutral field, Notre Dame probably wins by a field goal, although their kicker is not as good as USC's. And if it were in the Coliseum, I think USC wins this game. But that's just from a power ratings angle. USC is still in the playoff picture only if they win out. It's the same thing for Notre Dame, but Notre Dame's path to winning out is much easier. I like what I see from the offensive line, the defensive line. I think that the defensive back play is getting a little bit better, but the rain helped Notre Dame. I also wonder if USC's depth issues are really beginning to show, because having O'Connor at center, much different from having Reed. And Notre Dame, look, they were down their starting center and starting D tackle, but we knew this entering this year, even entering this game. Notre Dame is in year 4 of the Marcus Freeman era. USC is technically in year 4 of the Lincoln Riley era, but they had a hard program reset after the failure that was 2023. Notre Dame hasn't had that. And that's a credit to Freeman for not hiring an idiot at defensive coordinator because Alex Grinch doesn't deserve to be a DC at any high level of football. Al Golden turned out to be a phenomenal hire. That's the real difference between these programs. And they're still, for USC, they're still paying the price of it. For Notre Dame, they're still reaping the benefit. Is that Notre Dame made a real hire at defensive coordinator, a real hire, and kept close to their identity, while USC brought over the Lincoln Riley identity from Oklahoma, but it wasn't going to work, especially in Big Ten play, and they had to make a hard change and hard program reset, and that caused some transfers, that caused some roster gutting. Miller Moss didn't pan out the exact way that USC thought he could. They had to bring in a transfer from UNLV and Jade Mayava, who's first in QBR still, and I would argue a really good quarterback, maybe even an elite one. But they're still paying the price for that program reset where, you change strength and conditioning coaches this preseason. You change the defensive coaching staff. You change how you internally manage the program. You change NIL and change some stuff in the administration for USC. And, transfer here, a transfer there. Don't make very good portal evals. Don't recruit high school at an insane level because, USC had lost a lot of those pipelines. Riley didn't recruit California up until this year. This game was Notre Dame making a billion superior decisions. And despite USC having a matchup edge here, Notre Dame was able to win by 10 points because of the billion correct decisions they had made over the past 4 years that USC didn't make. Notre Dame had the advantage of being able to run the ball on that USC defensive front on top of having a respectable passing attack. And Carr didn't have a good game. Credit to D'Anton Lynn for forcing some, errant throws, getting some pressure. But he also just had an off game on his own at times. If you play this game again, Carr probably has a better stat line, even if USC's game plan is better and even if they stop the run at a higher rate. These are two great programs who I think both have bright futures. I think both of these coaches are some of the best in the business. Both these staffs are great. The difference is between these two teams, yet again, that Notre Dame is in year 4, and they've made a lot of good decisions. They haven't really made a bad decision. I think that Chris Ash was probably still a bad hire in the grand scheme of things, and I think they have, in a way, improved defensively, but also, USC only scored 33 points on the road against Purdue, fully healthy, and one of those was a defensive touchdown. Illinois was able to shut down their rushing attack, too. Like, USC on the road consistently now, regardless of competition, has not been as good as when they are playing at home. So I don't know how real that is, especially when, outside of that one interception, Christian Gray was getting torched every other play, and Leonard Moore did a good job, but everyone else outside of him, USC had open guys. It was just whether or not they could protect Mayava. Mayava saw them, or whether he could deliver the football in the rain or without the rain. And without the rushing attack, that's harder too. The point in all that being that Chris Ash was one of the only hires you could have realistically made that late in the cycle when Golden got poached to the Bengals. Like, that was very late in the cycle. You're not going to get too many people to move that late. And they got Chris Ash. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he does last at Notre Dame. I know in defensive efficiency, they've broken inside the top 25 after that performance. We'll see if that lasts. I still think this defense is a far cry from last year's defense, but it was probably always going to be with how much they lost. Look, Notre Dame, they won. They were the better team. And they also called the better game. There was no cute, end around flea flicker where Jade Mayava thinks that he can just throw it down. And I don't know how you do that if you're an aware football player. And passing it to a tight end on like a bootleg on 4th and inches. What? Why would you do that? Or putting in Hassan Longstreet inside the 10 to kind of run an obvious zone read play where you're not going to let them throw it. It's an obvious rushing situation for Notre Dame's defense, and they read it perfectly because they're not idiots, and they're talented. Just superior decision-making on the part of Notre Dame, not just in this game, but in prior years and seasons led to this moment. And as for this game and rivalry being renewed, it should be. I hope it is. I happen to actually think it will be. I know nothing's been mentioned yet, but I think both sides want this to be renewed, just in different ways and with different strings attached. I think it should be renewed. I think it would be heresy, and it would be a shame on both teams if they didn't renew this. I would root against both of these teams if they don't find a way to renew this, or against one of these teams if I found out one of them was the reason why this didn't get renewed. This should be a yearly rivalry. It's intense. It's physical. This was the best rivalry game in this series in quite a long time, because this is the best USC team since 2022. And while this Notre Dame team probably isn't as good as the 2023 team or last year's team, it's better than the 2022 team. And by the end of the year, it could be Freeman's best team, depending on a lot of things. And I think this is a stretch, but it's possible. It's within the realm of possibility, just unlikely. So it was the most competitive and best that we've seen thus far from a quality standpoint. I think both of these programs are going in the right direction. Notre Dame's just made better decisions. This Saturday, they made better decisions. The week leading up to this game, they made better decisions in game planning. And I would argue for the past 4 years throughout Lincoln Riley and Marcus Freeman's tenure, Marcus Freeman has made dramatically better decisions, and he's had a higher quantity of better decisions than Lincoln Riley has. And that led up to this game. Still high on Riley and USC in the long run. Same with Notre Dame, but Notre Dame's now firmly in the playoff race if they just win out. And as for USC, you do have to win out, but you play Oregon and Nebraska on the road and get Iowa at home. Notre Dame's toughest game is at Pitt. So one's much more likely to get to the playoffs than the other for sure. Now we can talk about my reaction to the AP Top 25. That's what we can discuss now. So the AP Top 25, your top 10 teams. Ohio State's number 1, by the way, but there's a lot of interesting teams inside of the top 25. I want to discuss the most overrated and underrated teams from my perspective in the AP poll top 25 entering week 9. We got Ohio State at 1, Indiana at 2, A&M at 3, Alabama at 4, Georgia 5, Oregon 6, Georgia Tech 7. We could have a top 5 matchup in clean old-fashioned hate. That would be incredible. Number 8, Ole Miss. Number 9, Miami. And Vanderbilt. How about Vanderbilt cracking the top 10? Isn't that just beautiful? We got Vanderbilt cracking the top 10. That's incredible. And some other teams to mention, as you can see on the screen if you're watching this and you're looking at your screen here. Michigan entered the top 25 at 25th. Arizona State and Illinois entered the top 25. Texas fell a spot despite winning, but they won in ugly fashion against Kentucky. Cincinnati, they rose 3 spots. They're 5-2. LSU fell 10 spots at 20th. I don't even know what they deserve to still be in here. Louisville, 5-1 at 19th. Based on this and power ratings, I think there's a good chance if they win out, they're certainly in the playoffs. USF is 18th. Tennessee fell to 17th. Virginia at 16th. Impressive win over Louisville. We'll see how this continues. Missouri, 15th. Texas Tech fell from 7th to 14th. Oklahoma is 13th ranked. Notre Dame only rose up 1 spot to 12th. Shocked they're behind Vanderbilt and Miami. Well, not really Miami because they had to, but shocked they're behind Vanderbilt and Ole Miss and even BYU. BYU's 11th, by the way. So 5 most overrated. I got to go with Georgia Tech. I got to go with Ole Miss. And I got to go with Virginia. Those are 3. And then I would also add Tennessee and LSU to that. So a lot of SEC. I still think the SEC is the deepest conference in America, but there are not this many great, good teams in the conference. There just aren't. Keep in mind, I didn't say A&M's overrated. I don't think they're top 3 in power ratings, but I want to more so attack this from what they have done so far, not in theory and on paper what they are, but the body of work they've given us. A&M went into South Bend and did to Notre Dame what USC could not do. And a lot more good things in that game, I think, went Notre Dame's way than A&M. Same thing for what Notre Dame did against USC. The difference is if you take away all the flukish things that went Notre Dame's way against USC, they probably still win by 3. If you take away all the things they did against A&M could win by 2 scores. A&M is one of the best teams in America, and it's time to take them seriously. This is a team that, if they continue to play ball the way they are, and if they tighten up some things defensively, and Reed continues to gain poise and is more accurate throughout the year, they could win it all. So I don't think A&M, Alabama, or Georgia, or even Vandy, from a body of work standpoint, Vandy is a top 10 team. None of those are overrated. But who is Ole Miss beaten? An LSU team whose best win is what? South Carolina, who's 3-4, or Clemson, who's 3-4, or Florida, who's 3-4? Get out of here. LSU shouldn't be anywhere near a top 25. I mean, Michigan and Arizona State and Illinois have better arguments. Illinois played the 2 best teams in America. Indiana should be number 1 in terms of resume. Ohio State should still be up there because they entered the year highly regarded because of their resume, and they beat a good Texas team. They, crushed Washington, crushed Illinois. Those are your only 2 losses. Meanwhile, LSU's losses are to Vanderbilt and they are to Ole Miss, who just are not as good as Indiana and Ohio State from a resume standpoint. They aren't. So why Illinois from a resume angle should be ahead of LSU. Michigan should be like miles ahead of LSU from a resume angle. Even Arizona State should be. I mean, they've beaten Texas Tech, who's actually a quality team, and Mississippi State from a talent angle isn't that much worse than Vanderbilt. Just saying. Michigan beat a Washington team who's 5-2, whose only other loss is Ohio State, number 1. They beat a Nebraska team who lost to 5-2 Minnesota and to ranked 5-2 Cincinnati. And their losses, well, USC, who's 5-2 and, probably still should be ranked with the win over Michigan and the fact that their losses are to ranked Illinois and Notre Dame. And their other losses to an Oklahoma team who's 6-1 and lost to a Texas team that's power rated top 10 and whose only losses are Florida. That was really, really bad, but Ohio State on the road by a possession's a really good loss. LSU should not be ranked whatsoever. Ole Miss should be. Ole Miss played Georgia incredibly close. Georgia's only loss is to an Alabama team who, outside of that Florida State blemish, is playing like one of the best teams in America and has an incredible resume, beating Georgia, Vanderbilt, Missouri, Tennessee. And I don't think any of those teams, outside of maybe Tennessee, are overvalued at all from a resume angle. A very impressive stretch for Alabama. I believe that your most undervalued teams from a resume angle are, this is tougher, but I'm going to say Notre Dame, a little bit undervalued. Indiana, little bit. I think that Miami is pretty undervalued. What else? Texas Tech? Yeah. That's what? Yeah, Texas Tech, Indiana, Miami, and Notre Dame. Yeah, we're looking for a 5th. That 5th has, I think, got to be USC. USC played Illinois within a score and had the lead on them at one point and was very banged up and had to travel multiple time zones away. And they played Notre Dame within 10 and led them at one point, and again without starting center and time zone travel. And Notre Dame's 2 losses are to 9th Miami and 3rd A&M. So that's who's underrated here. Going off the board to look at USC, they should be brought in here, and probably kick LSU out. Indiana's undervalued because their win at Oregon is way better than any single win Ohio State's had all year. From a resume angle, they should be 1. And, like, it shouldn't even be close. It should be them who's won from a resume angle, and then you'd probably go A&M given they beat Notre Dame on the road. Like, from resume-wise, Ohio State should be 3rd. You could even argue they should be 4th, as Alabama's bad loss to FSU could be outweighed by all their good wins that Ohio State just simply hasn't had. Again, this is not power ratings. Power ratings-wise, I think Ohio State should be top 2, number 1 or number 2, interchanging that with Alabama, with Indiana and Oregon having an argument to be number 1 or number 2 as well, but I just wouldn't go there from a power rating standpoint, at least yet. But we're talking about from a resume angle. Indiana should be number 1. Notre Dame should be top 10 because of the schedule they've played. So they've played a Boise State team whose only other loss is to ranked USF. They played an NC State team who's probably going bowling. They dominated Purdue after some early struggles. And look, again, lost to Miami in a game where if you play that neutral field, Notre Dame probably wins. They'd be favored to win neutral field. And they'd probably even be favored in Hard Rock if they played tomorrow. A&M, if that game were played neutral field, Notre Dame's probably favored. If it's played in South Bend, Notre Dame's probably favored, definitely. If it's played in Aggie Land, Notre Dame could be favored. 2 close losses. A wonderful win at home against a great team in USC, and dominant wins elsewhere. I know we're not talking power ratings. From a power ratings angle, Notre Dame should definitely be top 10. But I think Notre Dame should be probably ahead of Ole Miss and or BYU from a resume standpoint. Maybe Georgia Tech. I'll go with they should be ahead of Georgia Tech and Ole Miss. BYU beating Utah was a quality win. That's enough of a quality win, and Utah is an argument to be a top 25 ranked team to where, BYU deserves to be ranked that high from a resume angle or close to it. In terms of power ratings, they are in no way a top 10 or even top 20 team in America. Those are my thoughts on the Week 9 AP Poll Top 25 as to who's the most overrated and underrated teams in America. Overall, this doesn't really matter, and I think that the best teams in America all reside within the top 6. All your teams inside the top 6, no one outside of maybe Miami or Notre Dame is better than any of those teams inside the top 6. So, as to who's going to win it all, the pollsters are pretty dead on accurate in regards to that. And yeah, I mean, I have some complaints about teams outside the top 10, but yeah, there's a lot of nuance and a lot of argument as to who should even be inside the top 25. All right, now moving on to talk about my power ratings, my Week 9 power ratings. Who are the best teams in college football entering Week 9? From a power ratings angle, I asked this question. Not who you think that the 10 best strength of records are, but who are the 10 best teams from a roster, coaching, everything angle. Let me know down in the comment section below. I am going to give you my top 10 right here. And we're going to start with number 10, Texas Tech at 6-1. So this might get some pushback because they just lost, but again, this is power ratings. Tech had a backup QB against one of the best staffs in the Big 12 and a roster that, if it plays to its ceiling, is one of the best in the Big 12 on the road. And they nearly won with a pretty bad game and a lot of things that went wrong for them. That, I think, shows that this team has gumption and legitimacy. We'll see how they respond, and they are not top 3 good as their analytics suggested, but I came away from that game thinking, okay, yeah, this team isn't fake, They're not elite, but they're not fake either. There's a lot of realness to what Texas Tech is. I wouldn't be shocked if Texas Tech finishes out the year like 4-1 ATS and is 10-2 ATS overall, and they'll be favored in all of their remaining games. With Lee Hunter, Skylar Jill Howard, I know, is out for the year on the D line, but then David Bailey, Romello Height, Rodriguez, their defensive front is insane. And then I love Coy Eakin, and Will Hammond's good, but Baron Morton is quarterback one. They have a good staff, I think, especially defensively, and their defensive line's a non-negotiable. So I think they're one of the best teams in the country, one of the 10 best teams in America. Moving on to USC. USC is 9th here. When healthy, I think USC is a top 10 team, and potentially even higher than 9th. They did get Kamari Ramsey back. They went on the road to a Notre Dame team who I have personally at 8th. I had USC ahead of Notre Dame last week, but with how Notre Dame won and how they looked, I moved Notre Dame into my top 10. I think they're better than USC, though not by that much. And USC, look, when they're injured, they may not even be top 25 if they're injured at a variety of positions. When they're healthy, or mostly healthy, this is a top 10 team. They have the number 1 quarterback in QBR and Jade Mayava, the number 2 wide receiver probably in America, and Makai Lemon, or something very close, or number 3 wide receiver. He's behind Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith, but he's elite. They have wonderful tight ends. They have an awesome linebacker in Eric Gentry, safety in Kamari Ramsey. I think they have a bright future ahead of them. Same thing with Notre Dame, and actually same thing with A&M. These are, or Texas Tech, but A&M too. A lot of these teams in this top 10, I think, are going to be in the top 10 in several years to come in terms of how they're approaching the game, their recruiting, their development. USC's done an impressive job with how much they lost from last year's team, and they're better. For Notre Dame, they're up here because their 2 losses were very close. They have not had a close win yet. They're playing dominantly. They're improving a little bit on defense, and more importantly, I think they're making great strides in the offensive line. They ran for over 300 yards on USC last night, and look, they're well coached. They have a good quarterback in CJ Carr. Their running backs, Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price, are easily the best running back duo in America. I apologize for thinking Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen were as good as they are. Their burst, their vision, their speed, combined with that blocking, is unreal. This team is a threat for the playoffs, and they will be a threat for the national title if they do make the playoffs. 7th is Texas A&M. The power ratings would favor Notre Dame over A&M neutral field. I would not. I think Notre Dame and their 2 home games against teams that I have in my top 10, USC and A&M, show who's better in those 3 games. So Notre Dame beats USC by 10 points, having an off game with CJ Carr. And yes, I think more things went Notre Dame's way than USC's in terms of like sustainable stuff. But regardless of that, you take that away, I think Notre Dame still wins. You take that same factor away from Notre Dame against A&M, and A&M could win by 10. Or they would simply win, and it would be more convincing than the 41-40 final score. I think A&M's better than Notre Dame. Defensively and offensively, those teams, from an overall efficiency angle, are very similar. Defense is very talented, but does have some issues, though they're coordinated and overseen by great minds. And offensively, their strength is their trench play, but they do have some really impressive play at quarterback and also wide receiver. You know, Marcel Reed, Mario Craver, Casey Conception, Terry Bussey, and their offensive line with, you know, Trey Zune, and it's just a phenomenal unit on offense. I'm impressed with what A&M is. There's a really good chance they could win out and be 12-0. Number 6 is Miami. I dropped Notre Dame. I dropped Miami just a spot after their upset by Louisville. I do think how do I say this? I think that Miami showed they have a physical edge to them that we didn't know if they had before the Louisville game. And by physical edge, I don't mean size, I don't mean athleticism, I don't mean freakishness. I mean the ability to get punched in the mouth and respond. They showed that. Notre Dame, they did, but they also led for much of the game. Against Louisville, you get down 14-0 and you find out who your team is pretty quickly. And Beck had an off night, similar to CJ Carr against USC. Now I know Notre Dame prevailed, Miami did not. But Beck had a very off night, I think, and Louisville started off very strong, and yet after that first quarter, after those first two Louisville offensive drives, Miami really settled in and was the better team. So I'm not dropping them by that much. I actually think there were some positives to take away from that game. For Georgia, I know they didn't blow out Ole Miss, but they were the better team. They won 43-35. If they were able to parlay some of those field goals into touchdowns, they would have dominated the game and won by 3 or 2 scores. So I think for the Dogs, you got to find a way to somehow improve that defense, but that offense is among one of the nation's best. They're very talented. They're better at receiver, at running back, quarterback, every which way than they were last year. Quarterback, they're not as talented, but Stockton's a better fit for what they want to do than Beck. Defensively, they look slow at defensive back. They look slow as a team overall on defense. This is Kirby Smart's worst defense since 2016, and I don't know what type of changes will be made or what will happen there. I don't think Glenn Schumann is an idiot, nor do I think Smart is an idiot. If not for that defense being as porous as it is against good teams, if the defense, say, was at last year's level or the 2023 level paired with this offense, I would have Georgia top 3. Or maybe I'd only have them at 5th, but they wouldn't be several steps below the teams in the top 4. They'd be, 5th with an argument to be 1. I hate my top 4. So let me show you what my top 4 is just all at once. I got Oregon at 4, Indiana at 3, Ohio State at 2, and Alabama at 1. Those are my power ratings. From a resume angle, I do think Ohio State, Indiana, and Alabama are your and A&M. I think Alabama, Ohio State, Indiana, and A&M are your top 4 resume-wise. And I think that Indiana or A&M should be 1, and Alabama and Ohio State have a weaker argument from a resume angle, like purely strength of record. Power ratings, it came down to Alabama and Ohio State for 1v2 for me, and power ratings are more so about what a team is as a complete picture, not focusing on one game. And I think Alabama's complete picture right now is better than Ohio State's. Their secondary is better. I think their offensive line is probably better, or at least it has a higher ceiling. Ty Simpson and Julian Sayin are pretty similar. Simpson's just had to play better competition. So I'd probably side with Simpson, but not by much. Wide receivers, obviously, Ohio State. Running back, probably lean Alabama. Linebacker would lean Ohio State. D-line would probably lean Ohio State too. Special teams, I would lean Alabama. It's really close, and I hate it. I think that any of these teams in the top 4 has an argument to be number 1, whether that's Alabama, Ohio State, Indiana, or Oregon from a power ratings angle. No coincidence these are the top teams in terms of national title odds. No coincidence at that whatsoever. Indeed, it's impressive what all these teams in the top 4 have done, more so than anyone else on this list, I think. Outside of maybe Texas Tech, due to the fact they quickly parlayed those portal additions and having a really dominant team. I believe that Oregon is going to certainly surpass someone ahead of them, whether that's Indiana, Ohio State, or Alabama, or maybe all of them, or maybe 2 of them. I think Oregon at the end of the year will definitely be top 3. I think there is more room among them to grow than anyone on this list. That is how young they are. That is just how young they are. You want to debate me that someone else has room to grow? I will listen to it because I'm far from perfect, but I don't think there's an argument that anyone else has more room to grow outside of Oregon, given how young they are and how much they lost. There's no argument. I would say out of all of these teams, I think Ohio State has the highest floor. Almost said lowest floor. I keep getting, you know, lowest and highest mixed up with floors for whatever reason. I think Ohio State is the highest floor overall. If you're solely talking about the team that I think is the least chance to be upset for the rest of the way, it's probably Indiana due to in-game coaching. Most likely would be Alabama or Oregon. Oregon due to youth and their travel. Alabama due to just the gauntlet of a schedule they have, which, look, because they don't have to play themselves, it's not as tough as some Big Ten or SEC schedules. It's way tougher than the schedule Oregon, Indiana, or Ohio State has to play. That's one of the biggest reasons I have them at 1. Not just because the schedule, because schedule's just a piece of the pie, but the fact they dominated Tennessee, they dominated Georgia first half and still held on to beat them second half with defense. They played the game Vanderbilt wanted them to, and Vanderbilt's top 20 power rated, and they doubled up their score, and they beat a good Missouri team on the road. Like, they've had top 20 after top 20 after top 20, in some cases top 10 or top 5 power rated team, and they haven't failed. The Florida State game is a fluke. The Florida State game for Alabama is to them what Michigan to Ohio State was last year. That is how you have to look at it. It is a fluke. It is an aberration. So that's why I have Alabama at first. But I hate the top 4 because if I could, I would put Alabama, Ohio State, Oregon, and Indiana all at 1 simultaneously. That's what I would do. I think that the margin between all those teams is razor thin. You then get a pretty good drop-off to Georgia and Miami, A&M, Notre Dame. From Notre Dame to USC, there might be a little bit of a drop-off. I think the top 4 are beginning to separate themselves a bit. But I will also say, at the same time, that it's not by much. It's a noticeable separation looking at this year, but if you were to put all these teams, say, these top 10 teams in the 2023 season or 2022 or really any season before this year outside of maybe 2021, there would not be a clear separation between a lot of these top 10 teams. There just wouldn't be. A part of the reason I do notice a separation is because everything is so close that even a minor deviation is noticeable. And that's a new thing in football that I really love and that I think is reflected in a lot of the power ratings. Though, again, Ohio State, Indiana, Oregon, Alabama, I think they're beginning to separate themselves a little bit. And last but not least, talk about my playoff predictions. That is what we are going to be discussing now. Here are my college football playoff predictions entering week 9 of the 2025 college football season. Let's roll it. So I have the seeding as follows. I have USF occupying the G5 automatic berth at the 12th seed. I have Notre Dame getting in at 10-2, winning out. They'll be the 11th seed. A&M, they go 10-2. I think they drop some games here and there, losing to, I believe I had them losing to Texas and Missouri. I think A&M is more likely to go 11-1 than 10-2, but I settled on 10-2 just due to the tough road spots there, and the fact that I'm speculating a bit on Texas improving and Missouri playing better than they did against Auburn and continuing to have success, despite the easy start and easy schedule so far. I have Michigan at 9th, winning out. This is another one where I think they're more likely to go 9-3, but given how they looked against Washington and the fact their offense has looked better really every game, there are some bumps in the road, but overall the trajectory is up and the defense showed progress. And Ohio State is, no matter what they do, it seems they have issues running the ball. I think that Michigan still has some matchup edges to potentially exploit in that game. So with it being at home and with Ohio State, Michigan will probably be their toughest offensive test by a mile all season long. I think Michigan just happens to beat them in this scenario. You can check again, maybe next week. Last week I had Ohio State winning that game probably by 10 points. So maybe next week I'll change my mind again. It's a 50-50 game, sided with Michigan as they're at home. And I think that what they did without Justice Haynes against Washington was more impressive than what Ohio State did of full strength against Wisconsin. At 8th, I have Texas Tech winning the Big 12, but because of that loss to Arizona State, the week out of conference schedule, and the fact that, like, let's face it, the Big 12 will be punished for their strength of schedule. They'll give Tech a home game, but they won't give them an easy game. They'll host Michigan in the first round. 7th is Oklahoma winning out 10-2 outside of their trip to Alabama, which I think could be very ugly. They will host A&M. Ohio State wins out, loses to Michigan. They are tied. Michigan, Oregon, and Ohio State all are for second in the Big Ten. Nod due to strength of schedule, the combined conference record of their opponents goes to Oregon to go to Indy. So Ohio State sits at home, gets like additional time of rest. Very scary for a Ryan Day team to get. They're 11-1. They host Notre Dame, rematch of last year's national title game. And finally, we got Miami, 12-1. They win the ACC. They win out at the 5th seed, hosting USF in a rematch. I think Oregon, 11-1, they win out, except they lose to Indiana again in Indy. Indiana will be 13-0. They will get the Rose Bowl at home. Georgia, 12-1. They will win the SEC rematch with Alabama. I just think that Smart, once again, playing in Atlanta isn't going to be bested twice. And Kalen DeBoer, SEC runner-up, going to get the 3rd seed. Some of those bowl allotments probably should be changed. Like Oregon should get the Cotton Bowl, and Alabama the Sugar Bowl, or maybe Alabama the Orange Bowl and Georgia the Sugar Bowl, depending on who they get. So that's on me for not having that be changed. But anyway, they allot those based on who they think gets the best advantage. So like there's not much of a difference in changing those venues. Maybe a little bit. But they would most definitely give Indiana the Rose Bowl, given they're from the Big Ten. Or maybe they'd give it to Oregon, due to the Rose Bowl being pretty far away for Indiana. I don't know. I don't know what the committee thinks. Some of that's random to predict. But we can move on now to the next round, where I think Miami pretty handily beats USF as expected. I think Tech, given the travel and given the fact that the way Michigan will want to play ball in a game like that with how good Tech's defense is, I think they'll want to play similar style of games where defenses lead with the defensive line and they try and lean on you with the ground game. Michigan's ground game at full strength might be a little bit better than Tech's. I do think Tech's defensive front is better, though, and their receivers are certainly better. So I think Tech would win this in a close game, especially since now, with Dominic Zavada not being the nation's best kicker, he's still pretty good, but he's not elite like he was last year. I can't totally give Michigan the edge in close games anymore, as I could preseason with that kicking advantage. Just can't do it. So they'll beat Michigan, move on to the Rose Bowl in the same way that Miami will move on to play Oregon in a New Year's Six Bowl. Ohio State, I think, would handily beat Notre Dame. Chris Drew and I were talking about this on a segment we did today that'll be released within the next 12 hours. He thinks Notre Dame could challenge Ohio State, and I understand the sentiment. I respect Chris. Chris is a better sports guy, more knowledgeable, better than I am. He inspires me. I respectfully disagree with that, though. I think that everyone in that secondary, outside of maybe Leonard Moore, would get cooked by that passing attack. And I think even Leonard Moore could get cooked if he has to play Jeremiah Smith or Carnell Tate the way they've been playing. That would be a bad matchup. Notre Dame would get points, don't get me wrong. And if it were neutral field or at Notre Dame, I could see what he's saying. But with it being in the shoe... Actually, you know what, Chris? If you're listening to this, I just talked myself into agreeing with you. Yeah, I don't think as good as Ohio State's defense has been, Notre Dame's offense has been good enough to where Ohio State will be forced to try and take away one of the pass or the run, and Notre Dame will just excel at the other and score points. And Notre Dame can probably do enough defensively because Ohio State's one-dimensional offensively to maybe pull out a win. But this is projected to be in the horseshoe. I think that if Ohio State could exploit Notre Dame's secondary, they will. Like, if they're given the opportunity, if Sayan's playing well and their defense is doing enough, they should. So I think Ohio State would win that game and move on to play Alabama in the quarterfinal. And then you got A&M against Oklahoma. I just like A&M's depth and coaching more. And since there isn't a massive travel disparity between the two stadiums, these both teams both play in the SEC, and they're both going to play some tough schedules, but especially Oklahoma as the year goes on. I like A&M's depth to actually outlast Oklahoma here. So they'll be the first road team in the playoffs in my projections to win a first-round playoff game. In these quarterfinals here, I think Oregon beats Miami. I think that one's pretty simple. I think that Oregon and Miami are similar at wide receiver, quarterback, offensive line, defensive line. One problem. I think that Oregon is better coached. I think they're better at running back, tight end. I think they have a higher ceiling on the offensive line, actually. Like, they don't have Francis Mauigoa, but I think their unit cohesively is better. And I like them more at defensive back. So I think that it'd be a close game, it'd be competitive, but Oregon would ultimately triumph. Indiana is a better version of Texas Tech, both punch well above their weight class, both lead defensively on the defensive line, and their quarterback wide receiver play leads the way, and then their trench play dominates the weak and is good enough to last against the strong. Indiana's a better version of Tech. It's 2021 Michigan-Georgia theory. I think Indiana would win that game pretty decisively. Ohio State, Alabama's tough. Those are my top two power-rated teams. I think Oregon will surpass one of them at the end of the year. But in a lot of ways, that matchup would be the de facto national title game. My reason for picking Alabama would be that bye, seeing what they could do against Notre Dame, and also the idea that, look, Ohio State's defense is better. Overall, it's much better than Alabama's. But I think Alabama's secondary is a tinge better. And while I think Ohio State has better receivers than Alabama, I don't know whose pass protection is better, and I don't know who's better between Simpson and Sayan. So there is a chance Alabama has the air attack advantage here. And if that's the case, and I think it's the case, but we'll see, Ohio State has shown even when they want to run the ball, they can't. Alabama was able to run it well enough against Missouri to where I think, yeah, they have something there. So even though Ohio State statistically would have the edge in the run game, their run offense versus Alabama's run defense compared to Alabama's rush offense versus Ohio State's, I'd actually trust Alabama to at least match Ohio State in that category. At least as of right now. So I would pick them to beat Ohio State, move on. They'd play Georgia in the Peach Bowl. Georgia would beat A&M. It would be close, very close, but I like what I see out of Georgia's offense more, and a lot of these SEC teams that are really good, maybe it's because the SEC is a bunch of good offenses, but the defenses have not impressed me so far. So in a game where both teams, have issues on defense and you're only going to get a few stops, I expect Smart to do a better job of engineering those than Elko. But this would be, that along with Ohio State, Alabama would be the most competitive of the quarterfinals by a mile. So unlike last year where all the teams that got a bye lost, this year I think all the teams that get a bye will win, at least in this projection. In reality, the likelihood of that happening is small. I have Oregon beating Indiana, third time's a charm, and I have Alabama beating Georgia. So, regular season matchup to championship game matchup to semifinal matchup. Pretty incredible. This is what the 12-team playoff brings us, whether you hate it, whether you love it. This is a definite possibility. I mean, think of like Ohio State, Michigan. I mean, what if Indiana loses to Penn State? What if Oregon loses to Iowa? And Ohio State wins out, but Michigan wins out. They face off and Michigan wins, and they rematch in Indy. Ohio State wins, and then they rematch again in the playoffs in like the quarterfinals or something. Probably won't happen this year, but in the future, it's possible. I mean, these things might happen. What about Ohio State? I mean, Ohio State, that really can't happen with them outside of that Michigan game because Penn State sucks and they don't play Indiana or Oregon. But last year, if they beat Michigan, they get to play Oregon again in Indy. They'd be favored. They'd probably win. They could have rematched again with Oregon in the postseason. This stuff happens. I'm picking Oregon to win because I think long-term they have higher upside than Indiana. I don't want to doubt Cignetti. At this point, I'm pretty convinced that if Indiana gets to the Big Ten title game, they'll win it. Because I think if Ohio State goes, after the win over Michigan, they're going to be flooded with emotions. And I think that Day is an emotional coach, and Cignetti is more even-keeled and is the best game planner and game day coach in America. So I'd like Indiana in a rematch with Ohio State where they have the motivation factor. They'll be the underdog. I'd like them to get them there, and I had that being the case in a previous CFP bracket where I had Ohio State winning it all, but their one loss coming to Indiana and Indy. It's the same thing here where I had Indiana and Ohio State rematching, but Ohio State beating them because I think in the playoffs the most talented teams will win, and Indiana has the advantage of being older and being extremely well coached. That doesn't always have a lot to do with talent. And since Ohio State and Oregon and like Alabama, they're well coached on top of being very talented, that in theory gives them an edge over Indiana. If Indiana manages to go 16-0 somehow or happens to win it all, good for them. And at this point, it wouldn't surprise me. Nothing would surprise me at this point. But I am going with Oregon to beat Indiana. And for Alabama beating Georgia, I think Alabama matches up well with Georgia. I think that they are the better team. This doesn't need much explanation. I just picked Georgia to beat them that one time in Atlanta because I think Smart has, a trick up his sleeve that he could use against Alabama. Like something that I don't know of, but he does earn those wins and pull them out of his hat. And I would have Alabama winning it all. It's Kalen DeBoer versus Dan Lanning. You have the obvious coaching edge. I'd actually like Indiana to match up better with Alabama than Oregon, almost for that reason. Like on top of Indiana having the better run defense and better staff, and probably having the better pass defense. I think Indiana's a better defense than Oregon. Oregon just has that, that ceiling to them where if it clicks, it's better than what a lot of teams can produce. But in a game against Alabama, where you have the prior history of the two coaches head to head, and you also have, Lupoy, who's I think still an inferior mind to Bryant Haynes, to Matt Patricia, to Kirby Smart or Glenn Schumann. And honestly, I don't know if he is better than Kane Womack. I don't. Having similarities at defensive coordinator and offensive coordinator, and the head coach goes one way, on top of currently, how the teams are constructed. Alabama's older, they're more experienced, they have the higher blue chip ratio, and they'll, I think be the better team at that point. That's why I'm picking them to win. You can tell probably with how I'm stumbling over my words that I'm not confident in this, and I'm not. I think this will be wrong. I don't think there's a chance this may not even be close to accurate. And that's because this is hard to project, and also because it's been that much of a chaotic season so far. Yes, Ohio State's undefeated, but Indiana's undefeated. That's chaotic. Indiana beat Oregon on the road. That's chaotic. Florida State beat Alabama, and Alabama, I think, will win it all. I think it'll be the teams who I think are going to win it all at this point are Alabama, Ohio State, Oregon, Indiana. If I had to add one other team to the list, it would be... Oh, I have such a hard time with this. I don't even know. Maybe I'll make a video on that this week. Who are the teams who can win it all and why? All right, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. We've been on for almost 3 hours here, so I think it's time to get going. Thank you for watching. Really appreciate you guys. I really, really do. Make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. We'll be back at you tomorrow with 2 live streams, one in the morning, one in the evening. This stream did go on like an hour longer than I expected, unfortunately, but it is what it is. we'll be back at you tomorrow. So thank you guys for watching. I'll see you all very soon. Let me check for any super chats. I think there were some more sent, so I do not want to ignore those. Going for gold underscore 85. Thanks for putting up with me and my Super Sam. I'm a Husker fan, but I love CFB in general, especially the Big Ten. Yeah, go Big Red. Going for gold underscore 85. I think your Huskers will win some more games. And SEC outside, looking in, Mizzou, Vandy, Ole Miss, rank them. Oh boy. I think Mizzou will have the best argument at the end of the year, followed by Ole Miss and followed by Vandy. I think Vandy will go like 9-3. I think Ole Miss will go 9-3, 10-2, but probably 10-2. I think Mizzou will go 10-2. Thank you for the $2 and the $5 super chat going for gold. Really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much. I will see you all very soon. Back at you tomorrow. Have a great day.